People killing, people dying, children hurt, and you hear them crying. Can you practice what you preach? Or would you turn the other cheek? Father, 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 help us, and some guidance from above. These people got me questioning, where is the love? The love, the love, where is the love? The love, the love, the love, the love, where is the love? The love, the love.
Wow. Welcome to Re-Vera. Well, sorry about that. We had some difficulties. Looks like we still do. This is the wrong screen. Yeah, I had to update OBS right before I started. And naturally, it reset all of my settings that I had dialed in. I had all the chat and events and donos and subs were all like lined up for you. So I'd have pop-ups. It was pretty sweet. But done a really quick reset in the last 5 minutes, rebuilding everything. And I just need to add... Yeah, don't ask. Somehow those got swapped. Yes. There we go. I just need to drag that down. There we go. Okay. Yes. All right. Well, I'm going to see if I can call Ross. We've been friends on Facebook for years. So should have a good chat. And hopefully I can multitask and play a little Dark Souls. We'll see how this goes.
Can you hear me?
Yes. How's it going?
Well, you're playing Dark Souls and I'm playing Modern Warfare 3.
Right on.
Old.
Yeah, I was going to see if I could do a video call, but honestly, this is probably better. Last time I tried a video call, everything was crashing.
Yeah, I was there watching it on YouTube.
Yeah. So this is probably
the text that you get saying that I could hear you twice is because I can hear you on Discord, and I had the YouTube open as well. So I was getting some... It was like a 5-second delay. I was hearing everything twice.
I've done that to myself several times. So, good times. So, yeah, we've been Facebook friends online for years. We were in a group together. I friended you because, you know, we talked a lot in the group, and I think we've shared a lot of each other's stuff. I think that's kind of the extent of our friendship. I think is this the first time I've heard your voice, or did we have a call once? I forget.
I mean, I've heard your voice because I've been watching your conversations on YouTube, but I don't know if you've ever heard mine before.
Don't think so. Well, anyway, I think, well, I've introduced myself before, but I'll go real quick. I come from a very evangelical background, and raised Christian, raised conservative, listen to Rush Limbaugh 3 hours a day. And when I was 28, I started... there's some doubt planted in my worldview, and it quickly started to crumble after that, and I've been building it back ever since and learning epistemology to make sure that I'm, you know, on the right side of things this time. And because of that, like, how powerful an event that was for me, anything that I haven't put considerable study into, I was very careful about forming strong opinions on. So gun control is like the last frickin' frontier for me. I haven't really talked about it much online or off. Because I think something just came on, because now I'm getting an echo.
Oh, that was me probably. I'll change it back.
Okay, it's just
There we
making sure
go.
it's not me. Okay.
No,
Okay.
it was me.
All right. So yeah, since I knew that a lot of what I believed was wrong, I was very uh, careful about my opinions on gun control because I knew I was biased there. Uh, and I still have some of that epistemic humility, but I feel like I've come to some pretty decent conclusions. And it's like one of the only areas where my thinking didn't evolve a whole lot. So I was interested to have that discussion with you, who's got much more subtle opinions on it. And there's kind of two angles to the gun control debate I want to talk about. And the first is what most people talk about. That's like, what's the best thing to do? Should we have gun control? Should we ban guns? Like, what's the optimal policy in a utopia? But the other angle of this is it rhetorically intelligent to make that a issue right now? So those are kind of the two areas I wanted to discuss. But can you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about you and where you come from, what your background is, and all that cool stuff.
Well, I'm sitting back in my chair. Let's make sure that you can hear me okay and that I'm not breaking up.
I hear you good. If anyone's in the audience, Dorian Sapien's on. And Marquise Gempup. So, that's... Oh, I think I know who that is. So, yeah, if you guys can hear Ross all right, then let me know. Is that what you wanted to go by?
Yeah, what I did was I brought up the YouTube live that you're doing and just muted it. That way I only hear you once and I can see feedback in the chat.
Yeah, you're gonna... The video will lag a little bit, but oh well. What are you gonna do?
So my name, I go by Ross Fraley. That's not my name, but due to all the issues that we have in modern world, I go by my middle name, and Fraley comes from supposedly my grandpa on my dad's side was adopted and took my actual name from the Fraley name. So by blood, I'm a Fraley. So I went with my middle. And the reason I don't like my first name, but I've got two siblings, two brothers. We're all JRS.
Cool.
JRS 1, 2, 3. It gets annoying.
You,
I had
East Coast, West Coast?
I was born in Western Kansas. Yeah.
Oh, okay. No kidding. I'm actually going to be in Kansas in about a week or so. Got a little work / vacation up there, over there.
In Kansas, wow.
Yeah, gonna try some barbecue.
I wouldn't call it a vacation then.
Anywhere's a vacation.
Right now I live in central Missouri, so if you're headed to Kansas City, I'm about an hour away from there. Much like you, I grew up in a fairly conservative household. I don't really know what my parents would consider themselves. We went to, like, each of my set of grandparents went to different churches. My parents went to a different church. I think I remember about 4 of them. We would go for like 2 years, stop, find a different one. Stop for another 2 years, find a different one, stop for a year or two, find another one. I got married fairly young, and she was a Christian. We went to various churches together, and that was the time that I was going through my skeptical phase and actually leaving religion and leaving the conservative politics and ideology.
The world was unformed, shrouded by fog.
But yeah, you still have it sounds like a good relationship with your dad. It sounded like, I think. I haven't heard from my parents in years other than just a quick text to my mom. So
Oh wow.
yeah, I'm kind of disowned, I guess.
I'm sorry to hear that. Yeah, I mean, depends on how you're defining good relationship. I mean, I love them, and like we visited a couple times. I finally got them both to visit this year for the first time. I bought my first house, which is kind of a big deal, like 3 years ago, and I was kind of disappointed nobody in my family come visit for the first couple years, but they're finally starting to visit, and I've been too busy with work and not having sufficient money to visit them. But we still talk on Facebook. They refuse to have any long discussion about the things we disagree with, unfortunately. So I've tried. Instead, they like to do the passive aggressive things, like send me books by apologists and tag me on posts, and then I respond to it and explain why that's not applicable, and they doesn't help.
I got that for maybe a few years, mostly from my grandmother, one grandmother. I don't get that anymore. I just kind of, it was mutually, I'm cut out and I cut them out, basically. So at least you have a relationship. We'll put it that way. Is that a good relationship?
Yeah. Just a second.
Yeah.
Can you go off the Wi-Fi, please? I'll make sure the TV's off it. I just did an internet test a couple hours ago, and it was a good like 20 Mbps, whatever, which is twice what I should need to do this. But I'm being told I have a little buffering going on.
Yeah, I see that.
Oh well, what are you gonna do? They say they can hear you fine though, so that's all good. All right.
So we agree on so much that I don't see this as being a very long conversation, but it is what it is.
Yeah. Let's see. So like, what have you? I'm just little bit more curious if you don't mind. Like, were you in the military? I feel like you said you were.
Right after high school, I joined the Air Force.
Okay.
I've got an older brother, and of course, siblings are going to compete. My freshman year of high school was the first time that we actually had to sign up for classes, and my mom had boxes that she would store our homework in, and so I was nervous about signing up for classes my first time. I remember grabbing my older brother's box down, pulled out his freshman year grades, and was going through them. Oh, math, algebra, whatever it was. Like, he got a C. I can get at least a B in that. Public speaking, he got a B. I can get an A in that. So I just took his classes thinking that I would get a grade higher than him and all those. But I always wanted to go to college. My family couldn't afford it. I knew they couldn't. And so I did my research and came across the GI Bill and thought, well, they're going to teach me a trade in the military, so there's a trade right there. And as a backup, I've got the GI Bill to go to college for free.
Sure.
But college was more the primary goal, and this was a way to get there, which I think we agree education, period, should just be tax paid.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Free for the student. Okay.
Speaking of that, that's something I haven't talked about much. But if you're ever talking to somebody who's like disagrees with that, the best argument, in my opinion, it's not like we're paying for anything. This is an investment. Like if you Google what's the difference in a lifetime earnings between somebody who graduates college with a 4-year degree and somebody who doesn't, and then calculate the difference in taxes paid, it's substantial, and it more than pays for the higher education. So the government actually gets its money back if it educates the population.
My argument is just it's really a perspective thing. Like, I really think the conservative viewpoint does not really take an all things considered or a broad view of everything. You've talked about before the veil of ignorance, which I highly promote and try and teach other people, but I don't want to live in a society of uneducated people. I mean, he runs on is an educated populace. So why would you want to cut education? Or I can see promoting trade schools and trade skills, but you still that's included in universal education.
Yeah, no, there's a bunch. It's not just the financial for sure. I mean, I think that's a good argument that it's an investment and you get your money back over the long term. But
So I did 6 years active duty in the Air Force. I was a munitions troop. I did not like it. It was more the people than the job for the most part. And there's always the two ways of doing things. There's the you gotta do it by the book, which say you're just transporting munitions. Doing it by the book from point A to point B might take an hour. Well, you've got to get it to the flight line in 20 minutes though. So you can't do it by the book because of what you're getting told needs to happen. There's the right way of doing things, and then there's the way we do things. You know, so up for success and stuff is kind of bullshit. It's more like the good old boys club is how the ex-wife put it. I was married for 4 years too, but yeah, didn't really like the Air Force, so I used that GI Bill like I had planned, and I have a Bachelor's of Science in Psychology with a minor in philosophy.
Alright. So, yeah, so I think we will agree on all that. I just tried the speedrunning way to kill this boss, and it worked. Awesome. I don't think anybody can see what I'm doing anyway. Are you still there?
You're frozen for me. Like your stream is frozen.
Yeah, I should probably quit the game. I don't think anyone's seeing it anyway.
I just see the back of a guy's head. It looks like Assassin's Creed character.
No, yeah, I can see it in OBS. It's frozen over there. I did a test stream, and it all worked. The evidence is up on my channel. So, who knows? Whatever.
You're moving. Every once in a while, you're moving in the bottom right corner, but your game's frozen for me.
Yeah, I just went back to my YouTube, and it said had an excellent connection, so I don't know. Trying. Oh well. Anyway, so yeah.
So, what's your history? What's your past involving guns?
Okay. Well, I have a couple. So, got a little handgun here, a 9mm. And this is my Ruger precision rifle, 6.5 Creedmoor. It may look like an assault rifle, but it's not. It's a bolt action. You can see the bolt. And it's folding stock. Very accurate. To me, this is a fairly useless weapon except for paper punching. It's very heavy, so it's not even good as a sniper rifle. But, you know, it's fun to shoot. Punch little holes in things. I shot my first gun when I was probably 8 or 10. I was visiting my my family in Canada, and we went out to a ranch, and my uncle had a bunch of guns, and we shot a 22, and I think I got to shoot the 32 Winchester once. But then a couple years later, we moved to Idaho, and we had guns, and we shot and we hunted and all that cool stuff. And so my and it's one of those cases where I actually think most of the conservative arguments, a lot of the conservative arguments for gun control are successful. And that's the problem. I don't see why we should choose to fight on a topic where we don't have the clear higher ground. It's too important that we win right now. So that's a big issue for me for the gun control, because I don't want to be on the wrong side of arguments. So we can discuss whether it would be better to ban some guns or all guns, and or not. But rhetorically, I think it's a much tougher argument to make that we should make that our battleground issue. But what's your position on gun? So that's like a broad theme of where I'm at on guns. But specifically, I do support gun control, like regulation, like registration, like training requirements. I don't think magazine bans make any sense because they're fairly simple things to make, actually. But anything that's empirically validated as good gun regulation that actually makes a difference, while impairing legal responsible adults as little as possible. That's the kind of stuff I support. So definitely universal background checks. Over 90% of the country support those. I think that's a no-brainer. And yeah, there shouldn't be loopholes. We should know who has guns and who doesn't. There should be better checks for if people have red flags, if a psychologist doesn't think they're quite safe, if they're convicted of domestic abuse of some sort, or some kind of abuse type thing where they might be more of a threat. Like, those people certainly shouldn't have guns. Those people are more likely to offend with guns than anybody. So there's a lot of stuff you can do that's empirically validated to be effective, and I support that stuff. What I don't support is taking guns away from millions of responsible people who are responsible adults just enjoying their freedoms, basically. What's your position on guns?
I'd say it's complex, but also simplistic in other areas. Since Democrats and Republicans are debating this, or they're supposed to be, I don't like how conservatives, their starting point is basically, like, for the most part, I don't want to strawman anybody. Generally, it comes across as no regulations, no restrictions whatsoever. I mean, NRA, full tilt, we should have tanks and helicopters, and I don't think we should start the liberal side of that debate with, well, you should have some, but not. No, we got to start on the far extreme as well. The far extreme for me, no guns equals no gun violence. That's simple. Yes, it's a tool, but that tool causes a lot of damage. A lot of lives have been taken, and without that tool, those lives wouldn't have been taken. They wouldn't have been lost. The great examples, I can't think of where the first one was. No, it was Dallas. The police officer that went to the wrong apartment, shot the black guy that was eating ice cream. If there was not a gun in that situation, she would have just left, called for help.
Wait, so you're saying we should take the guns away from the police, or?
I'm saying that in a debate, if you're arguing against somebody that says you should jump off the cliff, your starting point cannot be just put 1 foot over the cliff. You can't compromise right away. You got to start a position that's a balance, that's equal to them,
Right. So
Um,
I respect the premise of that argument. I disagree with the particulars, but so as an example of a valid form of that argument, uh, Kyle Kalinske makes the point that if you that on healthcare, we shouldn't be going to the Republicans with a slightly modified version of their own plan, basically. That was
right,
done with Obamacare to like go to them with their own plan. He still didn't get any Republican votes.
right.
Bipartisanship is dead.
Like Harris is talking about a Medicare for most or something like that.
Yes.
Medicare
Whereas
Plus.
if we went there with public, like full on public healthcare, not only Bernie's plan is public funding of private institutions, but we could go with the UK's version where it's public funding of public universities. And then you can compromise with public funding of private institutions. But either way, single payer is the line because anything that's not single payer is unnecessarily expensive and complicated. And I think that's a valid case. One of the problems with that whole model of coming from the farthest away position we can, so we have a little bit of negotiating room, is there's two problems with it. On the first hand, like I just said, I feel like bipartisanship is dead. There's like, how many Republican votes did Obamacare get? And that was already compromised. I don't think if we started way over and then negotiated to Obamacare, I fail to see how that would have won any Republican votes either. But secondly, it's that just because it might be a rhetorically good strategy in a negotiation, I don't think that means it's a good policy to sell to the American people. And that's my biggest issue, is because we have to win. I don't think there's been a more important election in human history than 2020. I don't know if you would agree with that or if that's hyperbolic to you, but the fact that we have climate change that's threatening 2.5 billion, up to 6 billion people by the end of the century is a model, and it's gonna be mass migration, chaos, could start World War III. If it keeps going up, there's all kinds of horrible things that can happen, and there's also the rise of fascism. Like, Trump has brought a lot of fascism with him, and we're at the precipice of a lot of crises. It's good that you brought up the example of the cliff, because we already have 1 foot over the cliff, is my feeling. We have to win 2020 because of climate change, because of fascism, because we need sensible people in place that can put sensible global prescriptions on things that are dangerous to humanity, like biological warfare and studying these dangerous bacteria, and you can look at AI and the risks that has, like true AI and what that could do. A lot of very intelligent people are very concerned about that. So there's a lot of potential risks that are coming very soon, and most importantly, most clearly, is the climate change one. And we have to solve that as soon as possible. The difference in how much would get done between Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders could mean millions of lives. Like, could be, and Warren would be the best president in modern history, I think. But she wouldn't get as much done as Bernie because she hasn't shown the willingness to fight for as many topics. So, given that it's so important that we win.
Have you watched the last secular talk video that Kyle did on Elizabeth Warren?
I saw like one of his videos today because it popped up while I was on Facebook. Where Bernie Sanders was firing back at Elizabeth Warren a little bit and just drawing some differentiation between the two of them.
Yeah, he hammers Warren pretty hard because I might be getting the name wrong. I think it was Bernie Madoff it might have been somebody else. I know it's one of the financial advisors from previous administrations, but he was on, I guess, one of the major media networks saying that no, Elizabeth Warren is fine. She's not going to interrupt anything or make the changes. She's dialed in or something like that. She's more reserved than Bernie. So Kyle hit her pretty hard with that she's not
Yeah, I saw
she's
the
not as
headline.
clear and as progressive as Bernie is.
Yeah, and
But
I actually donated to the PAC that was trying to get her to run in 2016. So I donated in early 2015 before Bernie even announced. And so I was a fan of hers. I was a huge fan of hers mostly because I was unemployed during the recession. The recession personally hurt me substantially. And she had this really powerful rhetoric against the banks and trying to prevent another recession, stuff like that. And I was like, oh, that's all I need to know. But after Bernie, looking back, she's less clear of a choice. I still think she would be the best president in modern history because it's not very difficult competition, to be honest. But she hasn't shown she hasn't shown the willingness to fight. She'll fight banks and Wall Street somewhat, but she doesn't fight on foreign policy. She doesn't fight. She said that everyone on the Democrat side of the aisle has the same goal for healthcare, which is universal coverage, and that's simply not true. Most of the Democrats want to protect the oligarchs that donate money to them. They want to protect the insurance industry. So if you don't recognize that, I don't know how you're going to be able to get anything done with them, because you're going to have a lot of Democrats voting against your bills, and you're definitely going to need virtually all of them, depending on how 2020 goes, of course. So, yeah, I don't think she's nearly as good a candidate. And as I've went into before, and I was thinking I might go into it today. I don't know if you... let me just go over it real quick. This is my favorite argument for Bernie Sanders as the only rational choice. Anytime anyone talks about politics, we have to talk about how both parties have been gaslighting the voters and selling out to oligarchs. That's on the record. It's demonstrated by Princeton and others. So they have different ways of doing it, whether they're Republicans or Democrats, but they say what they need to get elected, and then they sell out to oligarchs. Democrats do it less obviously. They basically do it by being weak and dragging their feet a little bit instead of actually fighting Republicans. That's why Democrats suck, and they're weak, and they don't get shit done.
I would argue we've got several elected Democrats that are actually Republicans that just they just took the Democrat name. That way, we've got some wolves in sheep's cloth.
Yep. And given this, that most politicians are gaslighting us, it makes the most important thing about any politician integrity. And given the stakes in this election, it's never been more important to pick somebody with integrity. And that's very clearly Bernie Sanders. He's been on the right side of every issue his whole life. He's arrested in the civil rights.
Well, he's also...
all that stuff.
I mean, not to knock Warren, she is an activist, but not to the extent that Bernie is. And I mean, I'll be straight with everybody. I supported Stein. Stein's an activist. I thought she had good policies on several things. I think she was misunderstood, especially on anti-vax and stuff. If you look into it, she's not anti-vax. She made that very clear in at least 2 interviews that I've seen. So the progressive label and the activist label are definitely 2 things that appeal to me.
Totally. But that's why I identify strongly with Kyle Kalinske, because I think he is very, very laser focused on the need to win. And so if you look at his kind of policies, he's populist on everything. He points that out often. he points out that if you pull on each of these policies, they're popular with the majority of the country, because that's important. If you make a center part of your platform something that is not popular with the majority of the country, you risk losing votes over that. And Trump won by like 60,000 votes in a couple states.
But you're going to have to fight against the majority at times. You're going to have to. Take all three of us. I don't mean to speak for Kyle, but you've made it very clear. We're not religious anymore. That is a big minority issue. You know, so we can't say that we're populist on everything or that we're mostly populist.
I mean, policy-wise, I am though, because I'm not trying to ban religion.
Right, but so I often agree with Kyle on a lot of things. David Packman, Jank from TYT, Sam Cedar.
A little too cozy with Warren, the last one. Not Sam Cedar, Sink. He seems to be a Warren fan.
Jank,
yeah.
Yeah. He's more of a Bernie Sanders fan.
He does like honestly. Bernie, but he seems to be happy with Warren, and I would be less so. But
well, yeah.
Anyway,
I would be happy. I'd be happy with Warren. I'd be happy with. I would tolerate Harris, but I would really be happy with Warren and Sanders. And heck, even if Stein was still in it and she's running, I'd be fairly happy with Stein for the most part.
Well, yeah. I mean, even Biden would be better in the short term than Trump. Now, I think a lot of people make an excellent case.
That's an extremely low bar. You're holding Steve.
I know. You can make the good argument that it's not wise to vote for the disease to cure a symptom, because Trump is a symptom of the disease that is neoliberalism. Elites like Biden, who get nothing done and don't want to change anything, are the reason people are so pissed off at the establishment and why they rage voted for Trump. So that would be really stupid to put Biden in there. But in the short term, at least, nobody's as bad as Trump, because Trump is actively attacking the institutions that preserve our way of government. He's attacking freedom of the press and freedom of speech. He's attacking the Constitution on emoluments and birthright citizenship and, you know, search and seizure, and he putting people in cages and blah, blah, blah. We all know Trump's bad. So
he's the perfect argument for why education should be free for the student.
And why we need better education and we need federal standards.
Right, in general.
Because when education's so localized, you have deep red districts that just sabotage the fuck out of it. I mean, we have taxpayer dollars teaching people that Loch Ness Monster is proof of creationism.
So, my dog is looking at your dog on YouTube.
This is my puppy Lucy. She was hit by a car, so that's why she's got a bandage on. One of the reasons I was late for the stream was I had she chewed off her bandage and we had to hold her down and reapply it. But big old vet bill there. She's a husky. She's 6 months old. What kind of dog is your puppy?
He's a stray. We have a part-time worker that's probably in his 80s that his wife fed this stray dog some roast beef, and they already have a couple dogs, so they were able to put it in their dog kennel or cage. And so I went over there and made friends with it pretty quickly. And we've got lots of stray cats around, and we've got stray dogs on occasion. I don't like having them in the pound, so I'll bring them home on the weekends. And all the stray dogs have been long hairs, and I've had 2 lab mixes long hair before. And this guy's a short hair, so my girlfriend's like, "What's your excuse for this one? Why are you gonna get rid of this one?" And I don't have an excuse. He'll follow me around the house. I can go outside without him on a leash, and he listens pretty well.
That's awesome.
Stays right next to me.
So you're kind of fostering him, is what it sounded like?
That's my perspective of it, but everybody else is like, "That's your dog." That's like,
Yeah.
I've heard that so many times now. Like, you're not getting rid of that dog. That's your dog.
We
So
started with Lucy's mom. She was our first dog, and then we started fostering dogs, and we got two, and we found a home for one, and the other one is still here. She's our dog at this point. Her name's Lily. And then we bred Luna and got rid of most of her puppies, but fell in love with two of them. So now we have 4 dogs. Woohoo! So anyway, let's see. Back to the gun thing. So, I think you can make an argument that some things might be so important that they merit trying to go against the majority. So, for instance, depending on the poll you look at, Kyle likes to say that Medicare for All is popular 70% of Americans. But there's different polls, and it's phrased different ways, and some of them it does show a minority.
right.
But in that case, it is so easy to make the argument for Medicare for All that if he won the general, at that point you can't black out one of the only 2 candidates running. He's going to get the bully pulpit. He's going to be able to make his case on TV endlessly. And that is an easy freaking case to make because it's been empirically validated to work in dozens of countries. It costs less and is more effective. That's just like empirically the truth. So that's a really easy case to make.
Give me like 30 seconds. I'm going to let my dog out real quick.
Yeah, no worries. Drifter. Yes, exactly. And that's why people who aren't fans of democracy, aka Republicans, are so anti-education. And of course, they don't phrase it like that. They always have excuses, but it always ends up hurting education. They cut funding for it. They try to switch it to private so that they can brainwash kids with religious and political stuff. They spread disinformation campaigns against perfectly legitimate parts of education, like evolution and whatchamacallit, that new way they teach math, whatever that is, I forget. They're all super scared of that.
All right, I'm back.
Yeah, I was just talking to chat, Drifters, talking about how education is an important part of democracy. And it's totally true. Unfortunately, that's a long-term fix. And in order to fix education, you need to win. Like, that's the first step. We got to win with where we're at. So that's the challenge, and we do need to piece together a winning coalition. So,
So on top of that, to bring us back to topic, I would argue that schools not only should be improved as far as the information and the output of students, but it also needs to be returned back to an actual safe place for students to go and learn.
Oh yeah, everybody wants it to be safer. The problem is how do you do that? So
with the how to, here's the argument I would put for. You agree with universal health care.
Sure, absolutely.
And there's all kinds of different varieties of that. We can look at Canada's, England's, the Norwegians, the Denmark, like all these, Australia, Japan, all these different countries have some form of universal health care. And they're all kind of different, but we can at least look at those, and we could potentially copy one of them.
Yep.
Okay. So what about education? Could we not just copy basically the education that the system that Canada has, or Denmark, or Norway, or Sweden?
Absolutely, but I think I see where you're taking this, and it's not a valid comparison to guns. And the reason is people already have guns. So, you want to talk about the few hundred people a year that get killed by assault rifles. How many people are going to die if the police go door to door looking for guns? I guarantee a lot
And
more than that.
in the long run, it would be far less. Short term, you're absolutely right. Cops might get killed, civilians might get killed, but in the long run, it's going to be a lot less.
I don't think I am willing to make. I mean, you're talking about millions and millions and millions of homes that have guns, and
I'm
the cops
saying
make a
that
lot of
we at
mistakes
least,
as it is
I'm at
already.
least, all I'm saying is it at least needs to be in the freaking discussion. It needs to be considered honestly and well, not even respectfully, but just sincerely considered, because the far right throws out their extremes all the time. Is about damn time that we're extreme on healthcare, extreme radical. We're extreme on education.
Well,
Why are
it
we
has to be an extreme
giving
that
up a
makes
little bit
sense,
for
though,
this?
because if your extreme looks like a straw man and it's easy to hit back at, then it doesn't strengthen your position. It weakens it. So if I say I'm support empirically verified gun control, but I still want responsible adults to have the right to have a gun, there's millions of gun owners who are like, yeah, I'll sign on with that. Or at least it's not going to
Right.
keep them from voting for the Democrat that's offering them free health care. But
Right.
if you say I'm going to send the police to knock on your door with a SWAT team at 3 a.m. and take your guns away by force, that's enough to make people go, no, I will vote for the orange buffoon over you. There's a lot of diehard gun fans. Like there's a reason the NRA is so powerful.
You gotta pair it with other things though. So like Bernie Sanders is offering education, healthcare. With like it depends on values. Do you value guns over healthcare, education? And
Do
we're just talking
I?
about
Certainly not. But
no,
do a
no,
lot
in
of people?
general, no, no,
Yes. A lot of voters
right,
absolutely do.
which is insane. We got to change our values.
Uh, I can agree with you, but that doesn't change the fact that a lot of like that's one of the two big hot button issues for a lot of Republicans. It's abortion and guns. And if we can make those two issues less volatile, we can win enough support to win every election basically, because those are the two things they have pretty decent arguments on, and especially on guns. So again, like I don't think sending police door to door for guns is ever going to be a good idea. I don't think it can be justified on any level, and whereas good gun control, universal background checks, people sign up for that. Those things are majority popular, and it's a step in that direction. And if we start slowly phasing out guns and we put in grandfather clauses, and maybe we can eventually get to that point where we don't have guns. But I mean, I don't know that would be a better society. Yes, guns kill some people, but there was a lot of deaths before. There was in fact more murders and more homicides in the past before guns, and I think guns provide equality. Like that's one of the conservative arguments I think that has merit. If I'm an 85-year-old woman in a wheelchair but I have a handgun, I can protect myself against anybody. Whereas
I
if
think
you
that's
take away all guns, now
that's a false argument.
the bigger, stronger you are, the more safe you are.
Are all people created equally?
Certainly not.
Exactly. Okay. Are all guns created equally?
No.
So how the hell does a gun make you equal when somebody else has a different gun?
Because you can at least protect yourself. Like guns,
But they're not all equal.
they don't need to be. Like it puts a hole through you. Like if you have a 22 Derringer, that's still gonna put holes through people. Like it.
Yeah, but if I have a 22, he's injured. If he's got a 44 or 45 or 38 special or whatever else, I'm probably not just wounded.
I was a hunter for years. It matters where you put the bullet. A 22 will kill
Right.
all kinds of things. In
I
fact,
have
a
6
22 to
years
the head
active
is
duty
actually
under
more
my
lethal
belt,
than many other things.
and I myself own not a lot. I own a handful of guns, one of each type, pretty much. I got a 30-06 rifle, Savage, 12 gauge shotgun that I've had since I was a little teenager. And like you, a 9 mil, but mine's a Browning high power pre war. I think it's a 38 or 1939, somewhere in there. Okay, my issue is we both agree on healthcare. I can't see having a mass shooting and telling the victims or the survivors, like, at least you won't go into massive amounts of debt because we have universal healthcare now. Where we could also just say,
Well,
this shouldn't happen. You
it
should
shouldn't
have
happen.
universal healthcare either way, and this event shouldn't have happened.
Let me frame it another way. So, I mean, you and I both agree that the establishment has a massive amount of spin going on, correct? To protect the status quo and whatnot.
You're breaking up.
You and I both agree that the establishment has a lot of spin,
Right.
propaganda,
Yeah, totally.
and they build a narrative. Well, gun control is one of those, and they try to blame the gun. And to me, I think that's a distraction. They're trying to distract away from the social issues that are causing all of these issues. Like, if we had universal health care as well as universal mental health care, and if we had social welfares to where people didn't feel as desperate and they didn't grow up in these incredibly poor homes with financial stress and stuff like this, you know, if there wasn't this massive class divide, I think that's going to go a long way to reducing a whole lot of the stuff we see. So, like, another big thing is the drug war. Like, most of the gun deaths, or a lot of them, are caused by the drug war. If we legalize drugs, that criminal underground was going to have to disappear because it's not funded anymore. So those are distractions. Like, if you're talking about the mass
Right.
shootings,
To me, you're
those are
kicking the
kind of
can.
unavoidable because if you look at the statistics, it appears that serial killers have been going down. There's less and less serial killers all the time, but there's more and more mass shooters.
Crime overall has been decreasing over the last few decades.
Right, but it appears that people who used to would have been a serial killer are now just becoming a mass shooter because it satisfies the similar drives. There's been a few psychologists positing that. So, yeah, I think a lot of liberals are not as passionate about guns, and a lot of conservatives are, and I think it's a very... I think we're going to lose on it. I think it loses us elections.
I am by no means saying that gun control should be like a campaign platform for any Democrat or liberal or progressive candidate. That is not something that we should be campaigning on. It should be something that is done behind the scenes. Like, be honest, have your self-respect, your own dignity, your own integrity to not like fool people. But that can be a topic that we just push aside and wait until we actually get in office. But I'm a gun owner, so it's not like I'm biased. I'm this California hippie that doesn't know guns at all.
Right.
You know, and that's usually the straw man that we get. Like, I get
that's not a
constant
straw
conservative.
man. There's a lot of liberals who don't know the first thing about guns.
Well, saying that, yeah, that there is a lot, but when they're talking to me about it, I often get the question of what does AR stand for in AR-15, because they've dealt with those people and they all assume that's assault rifle. And so the conservative gets to correct them on this one thing and feel like they're right on the entire topic. Yeah, there's definitely more important issues. Like, this should be bottom of the barrel. Push it aside if you're asked about it. but take care of business when you get into office. Do something about it.
Okay, so I agree with that, but I wanted to discuss some specific policies. I mean, I think you would agree that if we just say we're going to ban all guns and send police to everybody's house, that's that's not something we should be going for. Like, you might want to get there eventually. I certainly don't, but it's definitely not something we would campaign on in 2020. Correct?
It wouldn't surprise me if there was a lot of deaths if something like that did happen, because let's see, conservatives were on the wrong side of the Civil War. They're apparently on the wrong side of World War II now as well.
Mm-hmm.
So killing cops or killing, like, one of my thoughts is, okay, don't send cops to go collect guns. That's a little too forceful, especially if the cops are armed. Which, if we're going to remove guns, yeah, remove the guns from the cops as well. Like, they've got so many unjust and unreasonable killings going on, and let's be honest, it's probably been happening for years now, but now media coverage is covering it more often and stuff. They've finally held accountable in Dallas recently. Well, actually, there's another one in, where was it? Houston or someplace, where they did a safety check on a woman and they ended up shooting her too.
Yeah, no. Definitely a part of the police violence issue is because, like, compared to other countries, is a lot of it is the fact that they don't take accountability. So, I mean, we don't trust the cops, because if people condemn a cop for making a mistake or intentionally killing people, then we would trust them more. But most of the time, the police union, the whole political, like, establishment, they, like, stick up for them, and it just makes us not trust them. But another part of the problem is that, yes, there's a lot of guns in our society, and that puts the police more on edge. So, I think that's true. But where is that going? So, yeah, I was asking the question of whether, I mean, you agree that we're not going to do this in 2020, right? Banning all guns.
I would agree that banning all guns is a very high mark to try and get to. That's a very extreme goal to set, but I think it's probably a worthy goal. Just because a goal is far-reaching doesn't mean you shouldn't set it. And I would also agree, I agree on the American values to maximize freedoms.
Right. That's kind of where I wanted to get into, was a little bit of epistemology and basic values and how we structure our policies. So you brought up freedom, and
right.
There's always a scale. Like, if there's some, let's say that we find out that somebody died from watching a TV, something about the lights of the TV triggered a seizure, like they can do, and it killed them. And that happened to one guy. Well, we wouldn't ban TVs, because that's infringing on the freedom of 300 million people to save maybe one life. So we all agree there's a scale.
I'm not advocating banning knives or baseball bats.
Right.
That's a conservative response and reply.
No, that's not what I'm saying.
Okay.
I'm just saying that there's always a scale. We don't just we don't immediately move to ban things just because they're dangerous, because
totally.
We agree to take on some measure of risk with some things because we want to. Like, we have the freedom to do things that are at least somewhat dangerous. And that holds true with cars. It holds true with pretty much every consumer good you can buy. It's probably killed somebody, because there's a lot of people out there.
Right.
So
what's the point, though?
Well, the point is, why should we deny the freedom of millions and millions of people just to save some people that are... I mean, if you ban guns, I think you can make a good case, and you probably have better you've probably studied this more and you probably have some statistics. And that's why I'm still fuzzy on the issue. Like when you get down to some statistics, there's statistics on both sides. And I would say that liberals probably have better ones in general, showing that you would be able to reduce some violence by banning guns. Banning assault rifles, I don't think is defensible.
I gotta cut you off there. I gotta cut you off because I hear this so many times. My argument, or the argument that I'm proposing, I don't take ownership of it. All gun or no guns means no gun violence. That's very specific in that there's no gun violence, not no violence. Getting rid of guns isn't going to get rid of domestic disputes. It's not going to get rid of baseball bats and stabbings.
Well, it doesn't even get rid of guns. It just makes them more expensive and difficult to get. So you can't say no gun violence because there would still be guns, obviously. Especially
if there's no guns, like how can there be gun violence without a gun?
Because banning something doesn't make them disappear. Drugs are illegal, but they're still everywhere.
Yeah, but the argument is no gun. It's not no gun except for this hidden gun. It's no gun equals no gun violence.
Right, but that's an impossible utopia because you can't. You can reduce the amount of guns in society, but you can't ever have no guns in a society. Like that's too.
Why not?
Late because there's hundreds of millions of them. People will hide them. People will import them. People will smuggle them in. People will make them. It's actually not that difficult to make them.
And Steve, when we find them, we get those away from them too.
Yes, but the point is there's always some guns. There's always some gun violence. And there's also other types of violence that's not guns. So I think you can make a reasonable case that you would reduce violence, but you're not going to... reducing gun violence doesn't necessarily... Like, there's still a balance here. It's not... We're not saving hundreds of thousands or millions of people. We're saving, depending on the policy you're talking about, anywhere from a couple dozen to maybe a few hundred to maybe a few thousand a year if you banned all guns. But
if you include suicides as well and stuff, it would be several thousands per year. And
potentially.
I'm not talking about a year. I'm talking about the next 10 generations, you know? Like, we have lost accountability in this country. It's about damn time we do something and get it back. Now, can we do something about our gun issue without taking all guns? Of course. It starts in our education system. If we taught, say, like, emotional intelligence or emotional maturity, if parents talk to their kids about how to deal with getting turned down, how to deal with a loss of a family member, how to deal with being marginalized, socially marginalized at school, being bullied. If we actually dealt with that stuff in school, or if parents actually took it upon themselves to do it themselves, as they should, but they don't, then maybe we could stop this, or we could at least reduce it drastically without having to do much of anything with guns. I grew up with guns. It is a tool. It does depend on the person, but we've lost accountability in so many different areas in this country. And we haven't harped on quite yet. I brought it up, but if other countries can do universal health care, if other countries can do education, why in the hell can't we just kind of mirror another country's gun control? Japan has almost no guns. They have shotguns, maybe some pistols and stuff, but it's extremely rare to have a gun in Japan.
Let me address that, but before I do that, I did just want to make the point that it's really, and you might even agree with this one, I feel like it's really, really dumb to make the first gun policy you're trying to push to ban assault rifles. Because the vast majority of gun violence is by handguns. Like, if you ban assault rifles, you might save a couple dozen people a year.
Let me be clear. I disagree.
You do disagree? Okay.
I do. Do you remember Neil deGrasse Tyson getting into a lot of heat with liberals with a tweet that he made.
I mean, several times. I don't know which one you're talking about.
Yeah, I think it was a gun issue. I'm not sure. He made a mistake that I bring up with other people. To me, the issue is about severity. And there's two different ways of looking at severity. Like you're talking about total lives or total lives lost. Another way of looking at it is individual cases. So how I explain it on Facebook, I've been in these debates a lot. How I explain it on there is I care less about Frank and Joe shooting each other over a property line dispute. Okay? That's basically what I mean by that is gang violence. You're in a gang, he's in a gang, you guys are fighting over territory, you end up shooting each other, doing drive-bys, all that stuff. I care about those things. I care about it less than I care about one person going into a school.
They're criminals.
Well, I don't even like using that. You and I are criminals, are we not?
Yeah, but I mean, these are people like you said. They're
that's on another spectrum.
They're going to want to kill each other regardless because of the drug war. If we eliminated that, we would solve more lives than banning guns.
So just like you talked about, you labeled them quickly on criminal. I don't even use the word criminal very much at all. I also don't use innocent. So what I mean by somebody going into a school or a theater or whatever and committing mass murder, shooting various people or numerous people in one instance, everybody would say that those were innocent lives lost. I don't use the word innocent, so I just call them bystanders. My concern is I care more about that. I care more about a dozen bystanders getting killed than Frank and Bob shooting each other over a property line dispute.
Certainly. So if you're talking about the difference
assault
in
rifles are key in that respect, are they not?
Not very much at all, no. Because yes, assault rifles are currently the number one thing people use in mass shootings. But if you ban them and they became difficult or expensive to get, people would just strap up with handguns because you can dual wield handguns. You can put a lot of lead out, and if you go to a place where people are packed together, you're going to have pretty much as high a death count. That's why I said if you ban assault rifles, you might be able to make the case that you'll save like a dozen people a year or something, but you'll still have mass shootings, and it's not going to help tremendously. People will find people packed together, whether it's a theater, a restaurant, a club, and they
Is it progress?
It's not, though, because you're limiting the freedom of literally millions of people. There's like 15 million was that hundreds of million?
We're already limiting the freedom of people that can't own an M16 or an M60 or a rocket launcher.
Right, but these are we're talking about taking away freedoms people currently have. So people currently own these, and to save a dozen people a year,
freedoms on a regular basis.
Okay, so I think the fact that you're talking about sending the police door to door to millions of people to take away assault rifles to save maybe a dozen people because they're just going to switch to handguns. I think that's a pretty compelling point. But that's just you're just talking about murders and mass shootings. If you look at suicides,
like I said before, I think cops showing up at doors is too extreme. I think that's just expecting or making the case even worse. You know, it's got to be done in a way that's not aggressive. Like, I'm not talking about sending SWAT in just to go in with a metal detector and collect guns. Unless they're unarmed. If you send in cops that are unarmed, that would be a little bit more appropriate. If you send in veterans that actually wanted to, that believed in the cause, and they didn't show up with a gun. They say, "Hi, I'm a veteran. concerned about some things. Would you like me to come? Would you mind if I come in and talk to you? That's one way of doing it. What I get from conservatives is you want to send cops to everybody's house and by gunpoint take our guns away. That is a straw man, because that's not what I'm talking about.
Well, if you want to ban guns and have no guns in society, it does get to that point. Like, you might be able to have responsible, law-abiding people give them up voluntarily, like a certain percentage of them. But
it doesn't have to. It doesn't have to go that route. It doesn't have to be that method. There's various ways of doing it. You can have somebody posted or security cameras at gun ranges. You can collect information that way. It's a public space. It's just like traffic cameras. You're collecting data, metadata on who they are, what they drive, and what kind of guns they brought to the gun.
Okay, I thought that would be an easy case to make, because handguns are the vast majority of not only murders but also suicides. It seems like if you're going to limit anything, it should be them. But
like I said,
so let's get more fundamental. So you asked why we shouldn't copy other countries' gun control, and that gets into I think one of the more powerful conservative arguments against gun control. And let's imagine a situation here that's not at all implausible, unfortunately. So let's say Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren wins the primary, and then in the general, and then they beat Trump in the general, but Trump says the election was rigged and that millions of illegals were voting, and that he's going to stay in office pending an investigation. AKA, that's a coup. It's a fascist coup, and we're like heading down the road Hitler brought Germany. If the United States went fascist, that would have really bad implications for the entire rest of the planet. And that would be really bad. And I think because of the power of the United States, I think we have a responsibility to keep our government in check and make sure a smaller minority of people can't take power in our government. I think it's especially important that we have the capability to mount a resistance or an armed protest if in that type of event. If that happened and we had millions of people show up in Washington, D.C. for an open carry protest, that would solve the situation pretty quickly. However, if the only people who have guns are the rabid Trump supporters, then, Hitler rose to power with only a few hundred brown shirts. It doesn't take that much if there's not a pushback against them. So I do think that the people keeping the government accountable is especially important in a country like the United States. If you're in Denmark, it doesn't matter. The international community is going to keep you accountable because you're a tiny ass country.
We're past the point of no return as far as guns and trying to do a coup.
How so?
What I mean by past the point of no return is that the civilian populace is, with whatever arms that we're capable of getting, we're not in a position to even try a military coup against the U.S. military.
Oh, of course not. And that's not the point. Because that's not how resistance happens. That's not how revolution happens. You don't try to take out the military. It starts with
no. I mean, even government. If you're talking, like, what's the argument that you're trying to talk about on the conservative side, the strong one of showing up at D.C. with 1 million people there open carry? Like, what's the argument?
Well, exactly that. If you had if there was a quick response and a whole lot of people showed up with guns, military tends to move slower, and they're not going to attack like populated areas. Like they if it's your own country, they're not going to just carpet bomb a city that has protesters in it. So
we've done it before.
No, we haven't. No, I realize
not carpet bomb.
Exactly. So I mean, they have bomb structures, yes, but carpet bombing is a whole different thing. So I think the most compelling argument against that is a handful of people with basically just assault rifles have been resisting the full might of the United States military in Afghanistan for 18 years now. So you can't.
I wish I could remember where it happened. There's an article. I'd have to do some more research. I remember reading about it. Somebody posted it on Facebook, but I was thinking Chicago. I just looked it up, but maybe it's Boston or something. The cops just did. They ransacked they destroyed an entire apartment complex, I believe.
No, I think I remember the story you're talking about. I feel like, wasn't it like some kind of Black Panther group or something like that in Chicago, I think? And yeah, they blew up a apartment block or something like that. Well,
Yeah,
they tried to hit one
they
house,
weren't-
but
I don't
a
think they
fire
were Black
spread.
Panthers, but it was definitely a low income apartment complex. I can't remember the city though. If I could remember if it was Chicago or Boston, or I'd be able to find it a lot easier. But um, uh, I'm glad that you can at least you remember reading about it as well.
Right. But you do have the capability to mount an expensive, prolonged resistance if you're armed, that you don't have if you don't. So I'm not saying you could defeat the military,
Are you
but
talking against cops or against U.S. military?
against anybody. Like, this is how resistance happens. Like, if you're a government leader, you have to fear people. Like, guns, like all the fiction we watch, all the science fiction, like they always try to present something that's more scary than a gun, and they usually fail massively because guns are extremely effective killing machines. You can send a bullet couple thousand meters if it's the right rifle, extremely accurately, and it's extremely hard to provide a level of security that can keep people from killing other people in that kind of radius. Like, when the president goes places in public where there's like skyscrapers and stuff that have a line of sight to them, like it's extremely expensive to secure all that area. It takes forever. It's incredibly difficult. So you can't do that for everybody. There are mayors, there are smaller bureaucrats, and resistance targets these kind of people to put fear in them. Like, if this is a fascist coup and they've taken over our government, then I think you can make a good case for the necessity of that. And if you don't have guns, you can't. So it doesn't mean you defeat the military. It means you put forward a good resistance that keeps them from getting too comfortable, that keeps you in the news, that keeps unrest, that keeps the people from getting comfortable with the situation. And hopefully, eventually, you start getting some military support and you can actually get some places. You can make some alliances with other governments and stuff, and you can eventually topple the government. But the resistance itself isn't going to defeat the military. The guns are incredibly effective, even if you don't have missiles and all this other shit. You don't need it because if you're melded into a city, they're not going to carpet bomb it just to kill a few people. There's too much money, too much infrastructure, too many other people that aren't involved. They don't want to generate that kind of ill will from the society. It's one thing to try to bomb one building where there's a bunch of protesters holed up with guns, and then the fire spread and took out the whole block, which is what happened. It's a whole other thing to just start blowing up cities because there's a few resistance people in there. So fighter jets and Apache helicopters and all the technology people talk about are fairly irrelevant to a resistance because, and this is how Taliban fights, this is how Al-Qaeda fights. They're in a city, they're mixing with the civilian population.
You're talking about guerrilla warfare.
Yes, exactly.
Right, I know. So, but as a munitions troop, I don't know everything. I'm probably a little bit more informed about the U.S. military's capabilities than probably the average person, at least. But what I'm saying is, even with all that consideration, there's no resistance. Like the only resistance that we have, what I mean by past the point of no return, is that we have one resistance, and that's our democracy. That's the ballot box.
Yeah, well, what if the government decides that they're not going to take the ballot box into consideration?
What if we had fascism established in this country? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, I mean, the ballot box in democracy only matters.
Then we're screwed, and we have to rely on other countries, just like how we meddle in the affairs of other countries. Hopefully, somebody or somebody's, the UN would step in if the right people got in touch with them and stuff. But if fascism starts or is or is established concretely, we're screwed. If the military's on that side, we're screwed basically. There's no guns. There's no guerrilla warfare. There's no resistance. This isn't freaking Red Dawn. Like, we're fucked. I'm sorry to put it frankly, but the ballot box is our only resistance. So, and I don't want to hype up things. I think it might be hyperbolic to say that this next election is the most important. I've heard that almost every election. Almost. I mean, I wasn't into politics when I was young. Bush Jr. was, I mean, we thought that was Trump back then. We thought Bush Jr. was George W.
And he was quite bad.
He was quite bad.
The scientific consensus is if we don't take radical action on climate change within the next 12 years, it's going to cost a tremendous amount more and in lives and treasure in the next 50 years. So that's why it's becoming more important, as well as the rise of fascism and the other elements I mentioned. It's extremely important. So anyway, like I don't think you haven't addressed the Afghanistan problem, because we're going to pull out of there having lost. Trump is negotiating with the Taliban. We've been fighting for 18 years. At this point, we've lost. Like, where's all this technology you say makes resistance impossible when a bunch of desert fighters with AK-47s has beaten us?
Well, first, we're not using all the technology that we do have. Trump did use Moab, which is short for mother of all bombs.
Yeah, I think they killed like a campsite with like 5 Taliban fighters with that thing.
Well, that's it. Like, I don't want to get too off topic. Like, he used Moab. He used it, in my opinion, in the wrong circumstance. Like, they were underground in tunnels and makeshift caves. You don't use freaking Moab for that. You don't. Moab is a conventional bomb.
Moab is a cool weapon. The mother of all bombs. That's what it's short for, if you're not sure in the chat. But I believe it was created to create a helicopter landing zone, right? It's just a massive blast that blasts all the trees out of the way so you can land helicopters. It doesn't
the largest
penetrate caves.
Conventional bomb that we have, which Russia, I guess, got news of it a couple of years ago, and they supposedly, I probably need to check up on this again because I didn't dig into it that much when I heard or read about it, but supposedly they made a father of all bombs or something like that.
I'm sure they did.
Yeah.
But anyway, I agree it was probably the wrong
Moab
weapon.
On the surface, or you use it on the surface. You don't use it for underground.
I mean, we're not fair. So there's two possibilities. Trump might have just done it because he wanted to see it used. That's entirely possible. He's a child. It's also possible they wanted to clear
regarding guerrilla warfare,
cover.
Though. Your argument was kind of more on the guerrilla warfare style, not the tanks and bombs and
exactly.
So on that front,
do you see my screen at this time?
What I see is military expenditures by country. Yeah.
Right. So this is why it matters, especially if the U.S. goes fascist, because if we go fascist, like, who's going to take us down? Like, that's the. Like if I mean China doesn't even come close, and they probably wouldn't. They're an authoritarian country themselves. Like Russia's not going to. Those are the other two big countries. If we go fascist and we start throwing our weight around even more than we do, and we start we basically trying to take over the world like fascist governments always do, because they always focus on the other. They always blame our problems on the other, and that's why they always become warmongering countries. Then it would be a very dark period for the world, and I think that's why it matters more.
I'm sure Germany thought, who's gonna fight against us, or who's going to be able to take our power with our scientists, and they didn't realize that their scientists left and created nukes. Anyway, my point is, what you're looking at, it wouldn't just be one country. Like what you're talking about, what we're getting into is World War III, and that would involve more than just China or just Russia. That's going to involve everybody. The UN, Germany. You think they're going to want payback on fascist ideology? You bet your ass they're going to be fighting us. Like, yeah, they're. But let's
sliver here.
As far as guerrilla warfare, I don't know too many people, civilian wise, that have like gas masks and night vision goggles. The communication that the military has, of
course,
the top down view that the military has. What I mean by like a civilian resistance, that's not going to last long when your internet gets cut, when your water supply gets destroyed.
Well,
like
yes, if we went straight to World War III and
No. I'm just talking about a resistance. I'm talking about coup.
Yeah, if you're talking about a long, slow Red Dawn kind of resistance, we're past
the point of no return.
It would not be good because yes, with the technology, that wouldn't. It would be very difficult to maintain a resistance for very long. But our best chance would be quick and hot, and causing enough resistance to where military factions like join with us and demand that he steps down, type of thing. Like that's the best case scenario, and I think it's a legitimate argument. And again, the Taliban and the Viet Cong both like beat us using rifles, so I don't. The technology, yes, is there, but we've been using our technology in Afghanistan, and it hasn't stopped them. Like, yes, it's not like they beat us on the battlefield, because if there's a battlefield, they're dead. Like, obviously our technology is vastly superior, but they can still mount an effective resistance, keep you from getting comfortable, keep you spending a tremendous amount of money that's unsustainable, and eventually they have to kowtow to your wishes and leave. And that's what we're about to do. That's why we're negotiating with the Taliban. So if you switch that to where it's the U.S., which is a much larger territory, there's a lot more people and a lot of guns here, I do think you can make a compelling case that if enough people acted quickly, you hopefully wouldn't even need any violence. Hopefully the military wouldn't be supporting the fascist coup. But
act with what goal in mind?
The goal of demanding that Trump honors the Constitution and step down.
At gunpoint?
In that particular situation, in that particular example.
How's that going to work? At gunpoint?
Well, depending on how the situation goes down, the goal would be to put enough pressure there. And if, like, overnight you had a whole lot of people show up in Washington, D.C. With weapons or even nearby, I think that puts a lot of pressure on them. Whereas if people don't show up, or if people are protesting but they don't really have any way of resisting, it's really easy to just tear gas them, and you keep the news quiet about it, and you just let people kind of get used to the idea of fascism. Like if there's not noise, if there's not news, if there's not shit happening, then they can become the status quo pretty quickly. People get distracted. This is, the attention economy. And if shit wasn't happening, they would be forgotten about. Whereas if there's pushback, if there's civil unrest, if there's people in the streets, if people are armed so that the police aren't willing to throw tear gas at them,
Aren't you attacking your own argument, though?
How so?
Well, if an armed uprising is going to keep us from fascism, but yet tear gas can be thrown and disperse the group with guns.
No, tear gas wouldn't be thrown at people with guns. That's my point. Tear gas disperses groups that don't have guns, typically. If there's an open carry protest, I don't think cops are going to want to throw anything at them because they don't want to get shot. There's an implied power there that isn't there if they're not armed.
I still see it as you're attacking your own argument. I don't think guns are going to, no matter how many guns and people we have, I don't think that's going to keep us from fascism. If fascism takes over, then it's going to take over the military. And if it takes over the military, the civilian populace is just screwed. There's nothing we can do about that. Unless we vote.
Trump, fortunately, is incredibly incompetent. His latest betrayal of the Kurds has pissed off the military substantially. And hopefully we can foster that more, because the less he has the military on his side, the better. There's a lot of people who served with the Kurds or who respected them for serving with us. And the fact that he gave them to Putin on a platter for his birthday, apparently, pissed off a lot of people in the military, rightly so. So hopefully he'll lose support over that.
If we get Bernie Sanders in office in 2020, would you not agree that would be on the other side of the spectrum from fascism?
Of course.
Okay, and then at that point, fascism really isn't a threat, or not an immediate threat anyway. And if that's your argument that we need guns, then do you have anything else to support why we need guns other than to keep fascism away?
I mean, it would take a lot more than one term of Bernie Sanders to get to a point where we don't need guns. But yes, if we built a utopia, if we strengthened education, if people were educated, if we became more of a socialist democracy, if we were well educated, people had the control of the means of production, if we had social welfare, if we had universal mental health care, if we'd built this society over decades, guns would become less and less relevant. And yes, eventually perhaps they wouldn't be necessary. But I think we're a long way away from there. Right now we need to win 2020. And if we lose 60,000 votes on the gun issue and that costs us the election, that's going to cost a lot more lives than the gun control ever would.
We already agree that the gun control thing should not be a topic. It should not be the platform of a party. That's ridiculous. There's other things. But we agree on education, healthcare, and climate change being. Oh well, we also agree on the number one. I would imagine, which is corruption.
Yes, that
corruption.
Is the one.
Right, corruption, climate change, healthcare, education. We agree on all of those.
Mm-hmm.
So we agree on citing this whole discussion anyway on gun control. Like, that's not a platform. We agree on that. The disagreement is, I see us being, if we can look at other countries for how to improve things, and what is a pet peeve is that utopian usage of, well, we'll never get there. That's a pipe dream. Why the hell not? Like, we agree on climate change. We agree on doing whatever we can, even with small steps, doing what we can to combat climate change. So why don't we take those little steps the same way for gun control? Or a little step isn't to take guns, but we could also teach emotional maturity, emotional intelligence.
Stop
how
the
to
drug
deal.
war.
I would agree with that.
Right, and
So
police learning to be peacekeepers who are
I'm
trained in
saying,
de-escalation instead of escalation. There's a lot of things we can do, and yes, there are small steps we can take on guns that are populist. But that's the important thing: is we need to have a populist message that's going to win. So if we say that we want
well,
universal background checks and red
I
flag
agree.
laws and stuff like that, that's a lot easier. And personally, like, I like my guns. Obviously, I'm going to support Bernie Sanders even if he said he was going to take all of mine away, because there's much more
Right.
important stuff going on here. But we're
Same
not talking
here.
about me. There's a whole lot of people who wouldn't, and that's my concern. I don't want to lose an election over it. So, it sounds like we agree that it shouldn't be a front and center issue. Unfortunately, a lot of Democrats are making it that, and it does seem to me like the establishment is pushing that because that's what they do. We're like I started talking about, politics is the art of gaslighting. This is what they gaslight us to get elected, and then they do what the oligarchs want. And the thing is, oligarchs don't want you to have guns either, because they are afraid of the peasants with the pitchforks uprising against them and taking their shit. They are afraid of a socialist revolution, which would require guns, and they don't want us to have guns.
I don't think the establishment is pushing gun control. I don't think Beto O'Rourke, you said many. Beto's the only one that I'm familiar with that says something like, yeah, we're going to take ARs and AKs and SKSs, stuff like those types of weapons. Whatever you want to label them, I could care less. But those types of weapons, he's about the only one that I think I've heard say something explicit like that. And if you go back and watch that, listen to the crowd. I understand it's not a populist position. I'm saying that, and that's why, since it's not a populist position, don't run on it. Don't make that a front-running point. But could you not do that in the background? Of course. And why shouldn't we? We're not accountable anymore.
Right, and I think that an excellent comparison to make, which is a strong comeback to conservative arguments, is the comparison to vehicles. Yes, cars kill people, but we register them. There's required training. You have to have a required license, and it's a privilege. It can be revoked if you engage in reckless behavior with it. There's a lot of regulation on driving, but we don't ban vehicles. And
I used to make that
I do think
analogy.
that's where we should be going. And
I used to make that analogy, but I don't anymore, because to me, cars don't compare with guns. They don't.
There's been mass killings using vehicles, and if you eliminate guns, there'll be a lot more of them. And what that guy driving a truck down a sidewalk, killing a bunch of people in the name of ISIS or whatever freaking terrorist he was, I forget. I think it was France. Like they are extremely dangerous things that can do a whole lot of damage. Not to mention, if you add explosives, the Oklahoma City bombing, he took down a huge government building with a truck loaded with fertilizer.
Right.
So
my family
vehicles are dangerous. And the thing is, people who want to do damage find a way. So yes, you can make a good argument that you're going to reduce violence, but you're not going to eliminate it.
Cars are also necessary. Guns are not necessary. For our economy, for things to be running as they are, cars are essentially necessary. Now, if you want, I've actually brought this up on Facebook. Somebody made that same rebuttal to me. You know what? I agree. Let's get rid of cars too. Let's do all public transportation. Taxis, buses, trains. If you want, if that's your argument, you want to promote that, fine with me. Let's further go to the public side instead of the private side.
And that would be, I think that is the way the future is going, because with the technological advancements in self-driving cars, it's going to reach a place
Oh,
where
definitely.
financially it doesn't make sense to own a vehicle unless you're like wealthy, because you'll be able to get everywhere you need to go for like 50, $100 a month. Like I've done the math. I work in the industry, and it's one of the
Well, if you're a
reasons I
politician,
look to diversify my resume, because at some point in the next 5 to 30 years, there's going to be a dramatically amount less cars sold. So being a car salesman doesn't make quite as much sense, or in finance like I was. But yes,
right?
that
But
regardless, saying that guns don't have a use, I would definitely push back on that. One
I
of the
didn't
most
say they don't have a use. I said they're not necessary, like cars are.
right, and cars aren't strictly necessary either, as you said. But yes, they are strictly necessary for some people. Some, like, there are people who need them for safety, depending on their situation.
Cars are necessary in the sense
And definitely
of
rural
keeping
people, like
of keeping
if you're
our
out in the country.
economy running the way it is. That's the sense that cars are necessary. Not that they're necessary for a person to have. You don't need a car in New York City, probably. What I'm saying is cars in general, the general cars is necessary for our country to be running as it is. The economy, if we got rid of all of cars in a split second, our economy would crash, right? That's not the case for guns. Guns are not necessary in an economic sense or really in any sense.
Well, in the subjective sense of the people who have them and want to keep them, people view them as necessary, because the right to self-defense is a fundamental right that, even animals have a way to defend themselves, and people take that pretty seriously. So I do think it's a losing argument overall. I do think we could eventually get to a society where they're less necessary, but I don't think it's a rhetorically advantageous position. I got somebody new in chat. Welcome, Vincere. Thanks for coming on. He's making some points here. Let me see. Almost all national surveys indicate that defensive gun uses by victims are at least as common as offensive uses by criminal, with annual uses ranging from 500K to 3 million. Do you have a citation for that? Because that seems extremely high, Vincere. And I'm trying to take the pro-gun position here, but I doubt you.
That might be global. I don't
It says
know.
national survey.
Oh, it says national survey. Yeah.
Let's see. Defensive gun uses.
If we get into the right, privilege, and benefit,
Oh, he's just quoting what
defining
Google
those
says.
terms, I think that's a rabbit hole.
Well, he brought that up when you said that they're not necessary, but the fact that there's that many defensive uses, and I don't think that's optimal either. I mean, you have all these good guys with a gun running around, then some of them get shot by cops. Obviously, the good guy with a gun only counts if you're white. If you're a good guy with a gun who's black, you get shot. That's happened. But people do use them. They do defend their lives and property, and taking that right away from people is not going to be popular. As to the difference between a right and a privilege.
I've got guns in my house, but a gun would probably not be the first thing I grabbed if there's a home invasion at my place anyway. Like, it's always the go-to for people, but I would rather... It's use of force. Just like cops have, military has a use of force. You don't go to the extreme instantly. That's what we're training cops to do that, and we're killing civilians unjustly. Well, the cops are not. I mean, we as in our cops. Right. But you don't want to escalate it to the max use of force and take somebody's life when it could be your child coming home that snuck out at night. We need to teach this stuff. If we taught gun owners to be responsible gun owners, then we wouldn't have any problems. We don't do that. If we taught children how to be responsible with guns and stuff, we wouldn't have a problem.
No,
but we do have a problem because we don't do that
I would
stuff.
support, like I said, licensing, registration, training requirements. You could even
Right,
make the
right.
argument that most people, unless you have a permit otherwise, would have to keep them at a gun club. I think that's what England does. So you can still go to the range, you still shoot them. You might even be able to take them hunting with a permit. But if you're like the victim of domestic abuse and you feel extremely insecure about your situation, you might be able to get a permit to have a gun. Like that kind of policy is a lot easier than just saying you can't even own them. But just a sec, let me cover a couple more things. So the difference between a right and a privilege is what we say it is. This is a lot of conservatives don't understand, apparently, that rights are like there's no carving in stone. There's no objective right that comes down from the heavens. The rights are what we say they are. What we as a society agree our human rights should be. That's what they are. Like we as people wrote the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and they can be changed. A, so that's one part, and B, it is subject to interpretation. Like the right the right to a well-regulated militia would be the counter argument. So it's not an infinite right to everything, and it doesn't.
We agree on all of that.
Right,
When
I'm just talking to Vincere in chat here.
Okay. What you and I would disagree with is I don't even use you were raised Christian as well. I was raised Christian. There's a lot of terms that I'm throwing in the trash and trying to not use. One of those being rights. To me, I don't even use the word because there are no inalienable or unalienable rights. All we have are privileges.
Right.
And in my viewpoint, we can call it a right. It doesn't change the fact that it's still basically a privilege.
Right. It's arbitrary, and there is no right that anybody agrees you should have all the time. I mean, conservatives are much more likely to be pro-torture, so you're talking to me about rights. Exactly.
Advanced interrogation.
Yeah. And they still treat people like George Bush as a hero in spite of the fact that there's hundreds of thousands of dead innocent civilians because of him lying us into a war. So, and then they have the nerve to call themselves pro-life.
So, we agree again on this issue too. I don't cut off the utopian idea of removing all guns or eventually getting rid of all guns. But you do. That's to me that's what it comes down to. We agree on baby steps. We agree on those baby steps of what we can do to combat this issue. But where we started this debate and why why you and I are talking is because we disagreed on that utopian idea of eventually all guns could potentially be removed from the country.
Right. No, we agree on a lot. I don't think it's rhetorically
It's just like
beneficial to talk about.
It's just like the death
banning guns
penalty.
entirely.
I mean, people were for the death penalty a lot, and if we're killing innocent people, then it's not really worth it. We should minimize that as much as possible. And if cops aren't being trained, their use of force criteria, we need to do something about it. And in the long run, guns will just not be necessary for anything. I mean, why do you need a gun at home for defense? Well, what are you defending? What are you defending from? Another gun. Well, if that person didn't have a gun, then you wouldn't need yours.
Vincere, what is a universal right? Like, can you name one that you think applies in all situations to all people?
Oh,
or
that's
should?
fine. Where's that at? Life, liberty. I don't see universal right yet.
Well, he said a right is something that you possess inherently by the nature of your creation. Although it may cost you to protect it, it is not confiscated from another on your behalf. And
I see it. It's up higher.
Disagree with that.
Yeah, that's talking about inalienable or unalienable rights in the Constitution. which if you look up a definition of that, it's a right that, as he says, basically it's something that is inherent in you, and it can be taken away. Is my understanding of the reading, and a right that can't be taken away doesn't make any sense to me. Anything can be. If your life can be taken away from you, then everything else can be taken away from you.
Yeah, we routinely take away all of people's freedoms and put them in prison and or kill them.
Right.
So that's not a universal right.
Hell, we killed that father and son that went to the Middle East that were American citizens. Can't think of their names off the hand, but
And
we killed American citizens.
yeah, to be clear, Vincere, I agree with the concepts of rights. I'm a libertarian. I believe in freedom. I believe in liberty. This is a question of semantics, more or less, of philosophy, of what grounds the right. We can both agree that we have rights and we want to talk about rights and we want there to be human rights, but that's something we agree on as a society. It isn't passed down from anywhere. We didn't unearth a tablet that said that we have the right to own guns or something.
Steve, did you just call yourself a libertarian?
I'm a left libertarian, yes. So a leftist libertarian.
Okay.
Which just means that we should be as free as possible, while still allowing for people's welfares. So we're trying to maximize well-being from behind the veil of ignorance, and part of that is maximizing freedom as long as it's not hurting other people. So I don't think the government should be getting involved in things unless you can make a good case that that's the best situation. Unless you can justify why they should get involved. And we can make that case for universal health care and all these other things we talk about. I'm just saying you have to make that case. That's all.
Let's make this real quick because it's off topic. We're on gun control, but I'm hoping that we'll at least agree on this. Libertarian gets used in various ways, so I'm glad you specified a left libertarian because there's left and right in America.
Yeah, the right libertarian.
Everywhere else is pretty much just left, but frickin' in America, we've got left and right libertarians. My problem with libertarianism is it's a simple question. I don't get the wrong answer too often, but the question is, would your version of libertarianism limit exploitation of other people?
Absolutely. We're trying to maximize well-being for society. So if you can justify, and that's why it's important, because if you just have the libertarian and you don't have the left part, then people do get exploited. Exactly. But we can make the case for why it's necessary for government to step in, because a good way to put it, I think, is nature abhors a vacuum, especially a power vacuum. The less power government has, the more power oligarchs and corporations have. And they will exploit people, they will hurt people, they will pollute, they will et cetera, because they're trying to maximize profit. So the government needs to hold them in check. And we have a voice in government, supposedly. Like right now, oligarchs have more of a voice, but it's supposed to be a government of, by, and for the people. So it's advocating against your own self-interest to say the government should be smaller and have less authority. Because we have say in the government. We don't have say in corporations. But that said, we don't want the government involved in everything. We should be looking to eliminate as much unnecessary bureaucracy as we can. Like when you put forward a regulation, you have to justify it rigorously. You can't just put out regulations that impose interfere in people's liberty without well justifying that that's going to better society.
My concern with maximizing freedoms that it sounds good, but you can either include or exclude. And I'm glad that you exclude exploiting or taking advantage of other people. My example that I use is price gouging. Hurricane Katrina. You live down there, let's say somebody did, and they need a generator They got good money though, but I price gouge them and charge them 10 times what a typical generator would cost. That's if we're maximizing freedoms, that should be allowed. But you exclude that, or however you want to see it, as including it in something that needs to be protected against.
Well, we're
But
maximizing well-being from behind the veil of ignorance. So that means we got to both consider the person's freedom who's trying to sell generators, but we also got to consider the people's freedom who need to buy generators but don't have sufficient resources. So that's what saves the libertarianism from the problems of like pure libertarianism, because you have to have that balance. You have to justify why the government should get involved. So like if you're going to say the government should be setting the price of everything all the time, that's an incredible level of bureaucracy and central planning that I'm not comfortable with at this level of technology. I don't think it's going to be beneficial. But if you want to say in an emergency situation that they should either limit pricing or just try to like give away what people need, like why are people selling bottles of water anyway? Why isn't the military there giving them out? Why isn't the National Guard there handing out generators? We should be looking to help each other as a society.
That I totally agree with. Yes, we should be. I mean, the phrase that I use, how I put it, is the best egoist is an altruist.
Right. Part of it's the rhetorical advantage of saying you're left libertarian, because it does stop people. The straw man most conservatives imagine of leftists is the authoritarian left. That's why they always talk about Venezuela and Stalin and Mao. It's always the authoritarian left. And I think we need to draw a clear differentiation between that and be like, no, we strongly support liberty, but there are, if you can make a good case for when restricting one person's liberty improves the life of many other people, then it's a valid case.
I reject their premise of there even being a left authoritative policy or ideology.
Well, there is. I've known, unfortunately, a bunch of tankies.
A bunch of what?
Tankies. Tankies are basically authoritarian leftists. They're the fascists of the left. They're people who go around with the hammer and sickle, and they talk about how great Stalin and Mao are, and we gotta put off people to the gulag and stuff like this. It's an aesthetic. There's not a ton of them, but they certainly exist, and they make the entire left look bad. And I've been supporting Vosh. If you don't know what a tanky is, I'm guessing you don't follow Vosh much. But I support him in his attempts to talk back against tankies, because most leftists will just like pretend they're on the same side. But I think tankies hurt us more than fascists do, because they hurt the movement. If I'm in a protest with hundreds of other people, like protesting the oligarchs, or we're going for Bernie Sanders or something, and there's a couple people there with hammer and sickle and wearing all this Stalinist type paraphernalia, it hurts the whole movement, because normies see that and they're like, wow, fuck them, it's fucking communists, and it like hurts the entire movement. It's kind of like if you're a conservative and you're going to a rally, if there's like the swastika there, that's gonna hurt your perception, obviously. And so I definitely don't think we should be supporting tankies or authoritarian left in general.
How I view the hammer and sickle is basically akin to Satanists, in that Satanists don't believe in Satan. Christians do.
Right.
They just call themselves Satanists.
I like to say they're secular humanists LARPing as Satan worshippers.
So I see the hammer and sickle as kind of the same way, in that they're flying it and they're showing that they're proud of it and stuff, and it's pissing people off, because those people that are pissed off understand it in a different light, from a different perspective than how it's being used.
Right, and if they're by themselves that's one thing. But I'm not marching side by side with them because it flavors the whole movement. They have not only, it's not just rhetorically, but they fundamentally oppose the things I'm support. Like authoritarian left is very different than libertarian left. Authoritarian left wants a bureaucracy that dictates everything, and they don't believe so much in human rights, and they refuse to condemn China and their slave camps because China is a communist country, and they think it's way better than the U.S.
What I'm trying to get into is whether or not there even is an authoritative left, because I mean, I understand that you said that there is, and that some people that are, but again, with that perspective, I would see it differently. That I wouldn't label them authoritative left. I would probably label them authoritative right, depending on their policies and stuff. But we can and for fun,
that's something
just for
people. That's something people on the right do, is that they refuse to accept anyone bad is on their side. That's why they argue Nazis are socialists, which is obviously dumb. But I do think it's disingenuous to pretend that there isn't an extreme that fits on the left side of the spectrum that's also bad, because communism is a leftist ideology. It's just, again, it's not a line. We're talking, the political spectrum is a square. And my favorite one goes left to right, but then at the top it's authoritarian and the bottom is libertarian. So it creates this broader spectrum, and there are leftists that are authoritarian, and that's not a good thing.
Right,
I need to handle Vincere here because he's saying some stupid ass shit. Vincere, you can jump on Discord and join my server, and maybe we can have a conversation in person sometime. But you're saying some dumb shit about socialism. Do you even know what socialism is? You wanna define that for us?
I'd be happy to provide some links.
Yeah, he said the problem with socialism is that eventually you run out of other people's money, which is what a politician said. One of the many politicians who are gaslighting us against our own best interests. Why would you believe people like that? All socialism is workers owning the means of production. So if you have a factory that is owned by the workers, that is socialism. What's so bad about that? Do you not want to have a voice in where you work?
A left libertarian would support Bernie. They would definitely support Bernie and Warren. It's the libertarian right that would not.
Sure.
That's Marquise up there. It's not that I'm like excluding anything bad from left. There's definitely some stuff on the left that I disagree with and I think is bad. But I would argue that the left is not. To say there's an authoritative left, to me, sounds like a contradiction. Like, straight up, does not make sense to me.
Right. It does contradict the values if you believe in the idea of liberty. But that, because, here, see if I can find the spectrum thing. Political spectrum. Yeah, right there.
Oh, all I have to do is quote a bunch of people and I can win an argument?
So if you understand what socialism is,
argument,
what
quotation
is the problem with workers owning the means of production?
Nothing.
Exactly. I mean,
I'm
talking about a market economy. So there's still profit. There's still people trading. There's still free choices being made in where you work and what you buy. But the workers own the means of production. Businesses are owned by the workers. Where's the problem with that?
I can't remember who I was listening to, but they made the excellent point of...
No, it doesn't. Okay, that's what socialism is, Vincere.
You're in a group of 20 people, a worker co-op running this business. Would 19 of those 20 people say that one guy deserves $50 million while everybody else gets $50,000? Of course not. That's insane.
Right. So there's the spectrum I was talking about. I have it up on the screen. But yeah, if exactly if we all went if we came to society with a clean slate and we were like, so who deserves what? There is no fucking way Jeff Bezos would have $112 billion or whatever he has today.
Right.
If you look at the average income in the United States, it's I think 31,000, something like that. It would take you 3.5 million years to earn Jeff Bezos' wealth at the average U.S. income. That is insane.
The people in the worker co-op decide the ownership or the scale of
Yeah,
resources and prices.
you
stuff.
still need managers. You still need CEOs. Leaders are important to an organization, so certainly they get paid more. It just wouldn't be a billion times more than you.
It's called a flat. It's called a flat organization or a horizontal business organization. You can find it on Wiki. Read up about it. I get the the quadrants that you're showing and that you're talking about. I've seen it before. I understand that.
Yeah, I know you do.
What I don't understand is authoritative left, because that seems like a contradiction to me. I mean, take for example, libertarian right. That is a contradiction in everywhere on earth except for America. And why is it an exception in America? Because we have a bunch of crazy, uneducated morons that don't know what the hell they're talking about. That's why we have a libertarian right. It's a contradiction. Authoritative left is a contradiction to me.
So I think by this spectrum, how they're talking left and right, it says economic left and economic right. So that would mean like the more the government is responsible for the economy, the more left you are. Whereas the more individual and market-based it is, the more right it is. So obviously you can have a government that runs the economy, and that would be communism, and it would also be authoritarian. So I think that's where they're getting to. Now that's not most like.
Are you saying
most of the left in the United States?
Are you saying that universal health care is an authoritative left policy position?
No, certainly not, because it's not authoritarian. It's what.
But that's exactly what that would be showing, is it not?
No, because it's left because of the economy, but it's not authoritarian. It's actually increasing liberty because everybody has the right to healthcare under that. It's universal. So that's increasing liberty because you have the option to go get help when you need it. So that's increasing liberty. That's not authoritarian.
It's increasing liberty in the sense that you're still alive, but it's not increasing liberty as far as choice. If you do universal health care, if you do like a Medicare for all, to where everybody's covered, period, then that's authoritative. You don't get an option of choosing like a private policy, a private insurance or whatever. So it is authoritative in a way, but I also understand, I actually totally agree that it increases liberty. What I'm saying is, as far as that graph,
well, it replaces it. Like
universal healthcare would be up.
You're still free to buy a typewriter. It's just been replaced by things that are more efficient. So in the same way,
but you have to buy
healthcare.
You have to buy one typewriter. You don't have an option of different typewriters.
Yeah, except we're comparing a typewriter to a computer. A computer's better. Universal healthcare is better. It provides people choice because you can go to different doctors, you can go to different hospitals. So obviously
it covers more. Yeah. I totally understand.
No, I know you do. I just want to be clear because we got a conservative in chat apparently.
Right, but you are reducing options drastically.
No, because it's not a real option. It's basically what we have here is we have a mafia-like middleman that is between us and our healthcare, And I don't care if I get to choose between the Italian mob and the Hispanic mob and the, like all the different mobs there are and the Asian mob. Like, that's not a good choice. I'd rather just take the mob out of there and not have that middleman. That's increasing freedom, not to have to answer to a middleman and pay them my profit.
Yeah, I totally agree that universal healthcare would be increasing liberty. It'd be increasing well-being for everyone. But what I'm saying is that I think most people would put that in the upper left authoritarian left. And that's what the right would argue too, is that you're limiting people's options. That I like my doctor, I want to keep my doctor, and now you're limiting me. Or, I like my private insurance.
Yeah,
And
but
now
nobody
you're
likes their
forcing
private
me.
insurance. I don't believe that. That's ridiculous.
Right. Well, some people do. Wealthy people probably love their private insurance, But I would say most people would probably put that in authoritative left.
I don't think most people would, and I think it's easy
But I
to
totally
push back
agree
on
with
them.
you that would
I understand
maximize
some
liberty.
conservatives see it as that, but again, choosing between 5 different mobs to have your protection money paid to is not a very good model. It's not choice. It's not liberty. Because anybody who
Right.
isn't the victim of substantial propaganda when presented that choice is going to be like, can I choose not to pay any of the mob? Is that an option? Cool, I picked that option. Because that's all single payer is. It's taking out that administration, it's taking out the middleman, and you just have healthcare. That's why it costs less. That's why all these countries have it, and they pay less than we do, because they're not paying the middleman. They're not paying as much profit to the system. So, yeah, I mean, we agree on that. It's just, anyway, nitpicking.
Right. It's just how some people are going to view it from a different angle.
Vincere, again, this goes to our fundamental difference in what we're calling a right. There's no universal objective rights. We evolved over millions of years, and we're figuring stuff out. There's no objective right out there. We decide what we want as a right as a society, and then we make that a right. And we want universal right to healthcare because, obviously, don't you want healthcare if you get sick? Don't you want other people to have healthcare if you get sick? If they get sick, like, why wouldn't you? It actually costs less. It costs less to cover everybody with universal single-payer healthcare than it does to have our current system where there's millions of uninsured people and 45,000 people a year die because they don't have full coverage. It costs less to cover everybody because you're cutting out all the administration. Think about when you go to the doctor. You have to fill out forms. Sometimes you have to be on the phone with insurance for hours trying to figure stuff out. Insurance can deny your claim, and they do all the time. That's how they make profit. Hospitals need a huge amount of administration to figure out all the insurance and collect from them. With single payer, you're eliminating all of that. It's much more efficient. It's just you come in, you get your health care, you leave. That's it. It's beautiful. There's no premiums. It works. Every country that has universal health care can't even talk about removing it because it's so popular. It works. It's insane. All of the talking points against it are rather insane. So, healthcare cost by country. As you can see, these are the next higher countries, and they're all substantially less. So this is the combination of the private cost for healthcare as well as the public cost for healthcare, like Medicare. And if you combine both, we pay substantially more. It's double than most countries, but even the next closest competitors, we pay like a third more. Our system is objectively the worst in the developed country. So I don't know why anybody would defend it. Libertarian left, Marquise. So it's just saying that we value liberty, and we want checks and balances on authority, and we want authority to have to justify itself. So it's not libertarian in the sense that pure libertarians are, because it's really dumb. You can't defend libertarianism. It's the idea, basically, libertarianism as it is in the United States exists with a complete lack of nuance. So it's saying that they only look at one half of it. So they say taxation equals theft. Okay, so that's half the equation. If you agree that that's true, you have to also agree that profit is theft, because they exist in the same way. And if you say that government equals force, well, without government force, there would be private force. Like, companies have tremendous force on you as well, and they have tremendous economic power over your life. And if there wasn't a government, there'd even be even more so. Like, if you go back to like the 1800s, there was company towns where the company owned the entire town, and they would hire gangs of people who would retaliate against people who'd speak out against them. They had force, and that's why libertarianism is really freaking dumb. So again, just because I say I'm left libertarian, don't think I'm libertarian. This is the spectrum we're talking about. So I'm not over here. This is dumb fuckistan over here. I'm over here where I can justify all of my policy positions from the ground up quite rigorously. Not here, where they think taxation equals theft and all government is force and all these kind of dumb reductionistic positions over here.
Steve, would getting rid of all guns in the country, would that be a utopian like milestone or goal, something to strive for?
Not by itself. If we first solve systemic problems to where crime is dramatically lower, people feel safe and secure. Crime has gone dramatically down because we have a strong social welfare net. We have strong education. We've kind of achieved the socialist dream. We own the means of production. We have really strong education. In that kind of situation, sure, I think we can phase guns out and not have them. So I think you can make a good argument that it would be part of a utopia. I don't think it's a good goal in and of itself, because we have to solve the deeper issues much first.
Right. You're saying it's something to work towards, but it's not something to basically shoot the moon to go right after it, instead of taking care of these necessary small issues that would have to be dealt with first.
Well, I don't think it's worth even talking about, because we have to address the core issues first. We have to have people feeling secure. We have to feel secure in our voice in government, so we're not living in an oligarchy. We have to have the education. We have to have the social welfare net. We have to stop the drug war. We have to get our crime dramatically down, and that needs to happen. We have more people denied their literal freedom than any society in human history because of our incarceration rate. We have a higher percentage of our population incarcerated than any country ever. Like, crime's a huge issue here. There's a lot of desperate people.
I understand all of that, but it sounds like it's just
those are the deeper issues. My point is, those are the deeper issues. If we get those fixed, guns solve themselves, because people won't feel the need for them as much. So that's what we should be talking about. It's a rhetorical thing. Like, I don't just campaigning to take guns away, or even talking about it as a goal.
No. We're past
I don't
the
think is beneficial.
Part. Right, we're past the whole campaigning on the issue. The discussion is whether owning firearms is a net positive or a utopian idea or not utopian. To me, having a country without any guns is better. It's more utopian than a country that has some guns. Even if all gun owners are completely responsible and accountable, I'd still think that the utopian version, or the more ideal, would be no guns at all.
Right, after you've solved the other foundational problems create
Right,
the
right,
reasons
right.
why people feel they need to have guns.
Right. So it's more utopian. We're saying that no guns is overall would be better in an ideal, in a utopian setting. No guns is better than some guns.
Right. I think we've agreed on that. Vincere, your counterpoint to our discussion on healthcare, it looks like it was everyone has the right to medical care, but you don't have the right to make others pay for it. Again, and maybe you missed this, it costs less. You don't pay for things that cost less. If I offer you a candy bar that costs $2 and the exact same candy bar that costs $1.50, you're gonna choose the one that costs $1.50, and you're not gonna say, "Well, I don't want to pay for that." No, you're gonna take the cheaper one. Like, why is this? You don't want to pay for it? Question come up even. It costs less. The conservative think tank that studied the cost of Medicare showed that it saved $2 trillion over a 10-year period. It
actually
costs
be
less.
It'd actually be a tax cut for the middle class.
Yes.
And the lower class.
There's so much
When we're
savings
talking
in
about universal
administration
health care,
that it
we're
actually costs
actually
less.
talking about a tax cut.
It's costs less to cover everybody than it does to only cover some of the people, because it cuts out all the administration of trying to filter people out and test them and all this kind of crap.
I don't know about the rest of you guys, but I don't make six figures. So if I was on a health insurance, which I've got the VA, luckily, and that's iffy, to be honest with you, but if I was on a private health insurance, I would not be on a private insurance that the millionaires and billionaires are on. I'm not getting the best quality and stuff.
Right.
I would be in a pool with everybody else that needs healthcare instead of a pool that they only need it on occasion. So it's private. It puts you in pools. It puts you in groups that it's going to cost you more because you're in a group where everybody needs it.
Vincere, if it costs less for healthcare for the entire country, that's the main point. You can split up where the money's coming from. But currently, the middle class is paying most of healthcare. So if it costs less, even if we kept the scale of who's paying for it exactly the same, everybody would save a little bit of money because it costs less.
It would cover more people. It would be a tax cut for the middle class and the lower class, which those are the groups that need it. You know, millionaires and billionaires don't need even more tax cuts. Plus, it would be better quality care because you're getting more stuff. You're getting dental. You're getting hearing and eyes. You're getting everything. So you're getting better quality care. More people are covered, and it's cheaper. There's not really an argument against it. Even Donald Trump said that that's his big weakness, or that's his big fear, is going against a politician that is advocating for universal health care, because there's not really a good way to fight against it.
Certainly.
Other than to claim it, also to claim that you want to move in that direction, but then in the reality, you don't. Because he said that he's wanted to have everybody have universal health care before. He ain't doing shit about it, and he's not going to.
He talks on both sides of every issue. What matters is his action.
Exactly.
But yes, this is a very telling graph. As you can see, the U.S. spends a lot more privately on healthcare than all the other countries, but it also spends an equivalent amount publicly, and the combination of both is it's double most countries. There's a few countries who maybe are 2/3 of the expenditure of the U.S., but again, all of these countries, like all the ones that are above the OECD average, certainly, These are universal healthcare, single payer, where everybody has healthcare as a right. They cover, it doesn't matter if you're employed, not employed, as long as you're a citizen of that country, you have the right to healthcare, and it costs less. So yes, of course, the middle class pays taxes, and those taxes go to healthcare. But it's not going. Since it costs less, you would pay less than you currently pay for healthcare and premiums and whatnot. So none of the arguments conservatives put against universal healthcare account for the fact that it costs less. They always ask dumbass questions like, "Where's the money come from? How do you pay for it?" But that's a dumb question to ask when you're talking about something that costs less.
When they ask the question, where does the money come from, it assumes that it's more expensive. And we reject their hidden premise that it's going to cost more.
Right.
Because our position is it's going to cost less, which means it's not, the question is the opposite. They ask, where does the money come from? Our question is, where's the money going to go? And our answer is the middle and lower class, the working class.
Yes.
Because they're going to save money. It's going to be a tax cut.
Exactly. Where do the savings go? They go into your pocket if you're middle class or below. Now, I actually do have a better job. There's every possibility I would actually pay more personally in taxes under Bernie's types of plans. But I think everybody who's in my kind of situation and happens to have a really good job, we all know people who aren't. Like, I'm not rich enough to help people with health issues because health stuff is freaking expensive. Like, if somebody in my family came down with cancer or something, I couldn't fund that treatment, not even freaking close. So would I be willing to pay a little bit more in taxes, but have the confidence and security that anyone in my family that has an issue can get health care? Abso-freaking-lutely I would. I would be glad to pay those taxes.
And I'd like to ask the same question right back at him. Where does the money come from right now? Because like Steve was saying, if a family member was horrendously diagnosed with cancer, where would the money come from for that family member? It would come from donations. It would come from, what's the website you get charity from and stuff?
There's a few.
I'm blanking on it, but yeah, it comes from everybody else that does have the money and the heart to donate it to you.
Yep. 41% of working age Americans, or 72 million people, have medical debt problems, are paying off medical debt, or have had that affect their credit. I was a finance manager at a car dealership for several years, and I've seen a lot of people's credit. Most people who have bad credit, and bad credit, just so you understand, starts you down the poverty cycle. It's very hard to escape because once you lose your credit, getting any credit becomes much more expensive. You no longer have that cushion if something happens where you can just take out a line of credit. So if something happens, you can easily be homeless, you can lose your job, you can lose your car. Things start escalating, and it costs money to be poor. So you become more and more poor as you go if you lose your credit. It's very hard to defeat that cycle. And what starts it for a whole lot of people is medical debt, which doesn't even need to exist, and it wouldn't exist under a single-payer situation. I mean, if people didn't have to worry about losing their medical care, people would be free to quit their job and start a business. And more innovators and more small businesses are a good thing for the economy. And I've seen so many people with medical collections on their credit. It's really sad to me. And I think it's the number one cause of bankruptcy, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think medical debt is number one. I'm prior military. I have VA healthcare.
Yep.
I went to college using the GI Bill, so tuition was paid for. Plus, I get they call it BAH. It's a basic allowance for housing. So I got paid to go to college, like not just paid for, but I got paid. to go to college. And I still support universal health care because it would be better than my VA health care, and free education for students. Even though I got mine basically for free.
Yep.
And I don't have debt. And not only would I support free education for students, but also debt relief for students that have already gone through college and took out loans. That debt wiped away. And I don't have that debt, and I would still support that. Like, I'm not selfish in the sense that I'm only supporting policies that would help me or benefit me. I'm looking at what Steve knows as the veil of ignorance, what would help everybody.
Right.
Regardless of my situation.
I don't even have kids, but I would glad to pay for education because it's going to make society a better place, as well as the fact that it's an investment that comes back. I just pulled up the math because I wanted to do this since I talked about it earlier. Oh, crap, I don't have my calculator out. But men with bachelor's degrees earn approximately $900,000 more in their lifetime than high school graduates. Women with bachelor's degrees earn $630,000 more. So if you look at the tax brackets, most of those are probably going to fall in the 22% range. So what's 20% of 900,000? That's going to be $180,000. Like, that's a lot more than most college degrees cost. A lot more. So it's a long-term investment that pays off for the taxpayer. That's like, why would you not do that? Not to mention we have a more educated populace. We have more innovation. We have less dumbasses being deluded against their own interests, hopefully, et cetera, et cetera. And yes, 66.5% of all bankruptcies were tied to medical issues. So, and that's 500,000 families a year go bankrupt because of medical issues. That number should be 0.
Right. But we would also have to reform education.
In which way are you speaking of?
Well, we have an education system right now that clearly, I would think, has failed. That something's off about a good generation or two. So education reform needs emotional maturity, emotional intelligence. That stuff doesn't get taught. Hell, I don't.
Right.
I would like to know why it took me graduating high school, all my 4 years of college to get my bachelor's and my minor, and I still had to watch YouTube atheist debates to figure out what a good definition of truth was from Matt Dillahunty. Like, why the hell wasn't that taught in 5th grade? Truth is that which corresponds to reality. That helps out with so much crap. Why aren't we taught that in 4th or 5th grade? Why aren't we taught logic in 4th or 5th grade, or at least middle school?
We need to spend a lot more money in education. We need better teachers. Like, if teachers made $80,000 a year or better, then because of the competition for that job, you attract more talent and you're attracting more educated people. And teachers should have like a child psychology degree. They should have a degree in how kids learn, like understanding the psychology of learning. And I've talked to teachers. There are awesome teachers out there. I've talked to some of them about this very issue of the fact that we should be teaching critical thinking. I was talking to a math teacher about that, and he was telling me about how the way he teaches math is he's using math as a vehicle to teach critical thinking in his classes, and it's like, that's genius. You should be doing that for most of the topics. Instead of just teaching history, you should be teaching about how historical method works and how to judge between true and false claims in history. It's important. Yes, Vincere, if the entire system costs less, which it does, then as long as it's structured correctly, which it is, you would have better coverage with less costs. With Bernie Sanders' proposal as well as Elizabeth Warren's actually, you would save money but have better coverage. You wouldn't have to worry about whether insurance is going to deny your claim for one reason or another. It would just be universal. So you would pay zero in private funds. You wouldn't have to pay premiums. You wouldn't have to pay deductibles, anything like that. But you would pay more in taxes, but it would be less. So you're still net saving money. So you would absolutely save money. Well, you can doubt it all you like, but again, it's cost less as a system. Like, that's a fact. So it shouldn't be hard to imagine why a system that costs less overall could save you money as an individual. But yeah, critical thinking in school, definitely that. I mean, we need to reform our education system. Our education system has not changed very much since it was designed to make people better factory workers, like freaking 50 years ago. It's changed a fuck ton, and we need to change it with it. Advanced math should be an option in high school, not required. Like, most people, like, you just need to know how to use the equations in your calculator, because we all have access to those apps. Like, you can get advanced math apps that do all the work for you. So learning all this advanced math is kind of a waste of time. Memorizing dates for history is a waste of time. Now, you should have history, but it should be teaching lessons from history, and it should be teaching critical thinking from history, and it should be teaching historical method. So, yeah, there's a lot of changes that should be made, but there should be more training on financial planning, and
it should also not be strictly white history, because I can't tell you how many times I've come across Hispanics and African Americans in history that I should have freaking learned long ago, but their names were never brought.
Well, I mean, I can't even talk to the specifics because I don't know what they teach in public education. I was homeschooled my whole life. I mean,
Really?
My textbooks were from the Institution in Creation Research and the Institute in Basic Life Principles, which is basically an evangelical cult. Like, our textbooks were the wisdom booklets, which are based on the Sermon of the Mount, and somehow they try to get to all the topics from there, but it's pretty twisted.
So where did you get your education in philosophy, critical thinking, and logic?
Same place you did, it sounds like. Skeptics. So after, like, my whole worldview change, there's a lot of different things that went into it. Fortunately, for one thing, I'd always believed in this is hilarious. I brought up wisdom, the Institute of Basic Life Principles. See if I can show some examples here.
I have a minor in philosophy, so I actually took a course on critical thinking and
it's awesome. Ethics. Yeah, let me answer that question. I got distracted by my search results here. So, first off, as a child, I think it was in reaction to a sermon I heard about how important truth was, ironically enough. But I decided, like, age 12 that truth mattered, and obviously I wouldn't want to believe something that was false. Of course, I believed that what I believed was correct, and I did until I was 28. But that was an important foundation to have. In my 20s, I started becoming interested in the human mind because I wanted to be able to help people as a consultant or therapist or something like that. And I know breaking habits is all mental. So I studied that, and I started to learning about the human mind and how that can explain a lot of the things that I thought were strictly spiritual. That was an important background knowledge to have. And then I also studied statistics because I was learning how to play advanced blackjack and how to count cards and stuff. And you have to understand you have to understand some statistics to avoid gambler fallacies and stuff like this. So that was all background information that happened but I still was quite sure I was correct. And I was starting to debate people online with the advent of social media, and I was like, I'd always been 100% confident. I always believed I could prove the evolutionists wrong, and the Earth's 6,000 years old, and I can prove it, and all this kind of shit. And I was so confident, I didn't understand how people couldn't see it. So eventually, understanding the effects of bias, I intentionally set up on this mental exercise where I was going to try to take all the bias away, take out my fear of being wrong. Like, I analyzed it and was like, what am I scared of? And I tried to get myself to a place where I would accept either way, whatever the evidence went. I was 100% confident it would bring me like back to what I currently believed, but I wanted to be objective so I could see it from the other side, so I could make my arguments better, basically. The problem is, once you take off the God bias glasses, they don't go back on easily. So once I took those off, I read Richard Dawkins' book, The Blind Watchmaker, and it just made evolution make so much sense. It planted a whole lot of doubt. Another big factor for me was the last creationist book I read was Genetic Entropy by John Sanford, it seemed very compelling, very academic. He cites a lot of literature. Seemed very powerful. But when I asked people to rebut it, somebody linked this. Let's see if I can find it. I think I have it in favorites somewhere. But they linked this. Here it is. Stand 4 Letters to Creationists. They linked this article that rebuts all of its claims in a very powerful way. And not only that, it shows how John Sanford is lying. And I didn't believe it, so I went to the actual sources that are cited. Like, I found them online, a lot of them, not all of them. And I read them in context, and sure enough, this creationist was completely lying. He was twisting little quotes out of context to make the research look opposite of what it was. And when I realized how dishonest these creationists were, that planted a tremendous amount of doubt. So anyway, all this doubt eventually added up, and I started looking at things with a more open mind. For a year or two, I was kind of just lurking in forums watching these debates happen, and it became pretty obvious which side had the reality behind them. And I started trying to test my views with the best, most educated people I could find, and basically self-educated myself on philosophy and critical thinking and stuff like that by testing it in discussion and debate with people. So most of it happened on Quora, which is good because Twitter and Facebook are pretty garbage for this medium. But Quora is a much better medium, and whatever you put on Quora stays there forever. So it doesn't disappear as quickly. And people tend to be more serious over there. And it was a really good place for me to learn philosophy and critical thinking. So I got the opportunity to discuss with people who agreed with me, people who disagreed with me. I got to test out arguments and counter arguments. And every time I saw a word come up that I wasn't familiar with, I would promptly Google it and read the Wikipedia summary. So I spent a lot of time on Wikipedia learning what terms mean and learning summaries of philosophy. Basically, I was educated via the internet, and if done properly, I think that's a good way to do it, because I learned a lot. It's a broader spectrum of education than if you just get a degree in something, because necessarily higher education is very limited. It's very specific. It's very specialized. But this type of education, where you're just reading the academic summary of topics, is much broader, and you can gain a better understanding of a lot more fields that way. I can ask intelligent questions about almost any topic. I'm not an expert in all of them, or most of them, or possibly any of them, but I can have an intelligent conversation about most of them. Yeah, I want to take some classes in formal logic, Jared. I've found a Skillshare on that, and I've been meaning to get to it, because I know the basics of deductive and abductive and inductive logic, but there's a lot more to it, and having the skill to create arguments and break down informal arguments to their formal structure is definitely a good skill. Like, I like hashtag what is your argument. When I hear an argument or I see an argument, try to break it down into premises and a structure, and you'll see if it's valid or not. And a lot of the times, you'll see that it's not even really making an argument. It's just like an observation that doesn't even mean anything, but it sounds like an argument until you break it down.
Oh, he brought up truth tables too. Steve, are you familiar with truth tables?
Actually, no.
So, what he's talking about is in deductive reasoning, you can show an argument using symbols, and then show whether an argument is valid or invalid using truth tables. But you got to draw it out. It takes a little while. I had fun with it too.
Right.
But a lot of people use valid very broadly, but valid specifically for deductive reasoning is the form of the argument.
Right, exactly. Oh, I should have saved it. There's what was that meme in one of the groups I saw today on Facebook? Somebody made the argument Thor is something to the effect that Thor is
I know what you're talking about. I think I posted it too.
You should, if you see it, you should message it to me on Discord and pop
it.
Or you can read it if you see it. But yeah, it compares the Thor argument to the moral argument, and it's
dang it.
People were trying to criticize it on because there's irrelevant differences, but the logical structure was a perfect comparison, and that's how you do that. It was a perfect textbook case of how you're supposed to do logic.
It was if there's a God, then we can know objective morality or something like that, and we know objective morality, therefore there's God. I can't remember the Thor one, but it's a perfect analogy.
Well, okay, now I gotta find it. I think I can find it pretty quickly. What group was that? Was that a Reasonable Faith? Yeah, it's basically that Thor causes thunder. Thunder exists, therefore Thor exists. Something to that effect.
Yeah, it was with thunder, yeah. Anyway, look into truth tables for deductive reasoning. For inductive, you use Venn diagrams.
Yep. I think it was that Reasonable Faith group. I want to post that meme because that is a great example of logic. And that's something I try to talk about a lot because that's the purpose of the whole channel. It's Re-Vera means in reality. It means in truth. And I think we can apply an honest an honest search for truth has pragmatic benefit to our entire lives.
And on that note, we gotta throw in Matt Dillahunty's quote.
Yep. That I want to believe as many true things and as few false things as possible. Yep. You're
breaking up though. My goal is to actually I'll do his and then I'll throw in my own thing. Matt Dillahunty has a quote of I want to accept as many true proposition. I think he uses propositions instead of things, but whatever. I want to accept as many true propositions as possible while also rejecting as many false propositions as possible. And both are necessary Because if you want to accept as many true propositions as possible, you would just accept everything, but then you would be accepting false things.
And then you'd be in a state of contradiction. Like the
Right.
law of contradiction gets you
So
to most
both of those
of what you
are
need.
necessary. As far as morality, I have two priorities in life on this issue. Priority one is to increase my own well-being until I'm satisfied without decreasing the well-being of others. Priority two being to increase the well-being of others, those closest to me, and then broaden out from there without decreasing the well-being of anyone else.
Yep. I thought I would be able to find it super easy, and it's not coming up. So anyway, the problem was in premise one in both cases, and it was the same structure, and it was basically that God is what gives moral knowledge. Moral knowledge exists, therefore God exists, and I was comparing that to Thor. So anyway, I'll have to find that and post that at some point because it's a really good example of how you demonstrate validity by taking the logical structure of an argument and putting it into different contexts. If it doesn't work in a different context, if you have something that you know is false or not good reasoning, then it's not a valid argument. You should reject it.
Well, they're probably both valid arguments.
In that case, yes, it was a valid argument. It was just the premise one was not sound.
Was false, right? It was, or at least unjustified. So a valid you can have valid unsound arguments,
right?
Which just means the form is correct, it's proper, but the premises aren't justified. So it's not a good argument. It's not a true or a good argument to use because it's unsound. Exactly. Soundness being key. Valid is just the form. It's just whether you'll get the premises, the conclusion follows necessarily from the premises, but soundness is really what everybody is concerned with. It's whether the argument is true or should be considered true.
I think I talked about this in a previous stream. And Wikipedia gives the example of a valid argument that's not sound, that premise one, everyone who eats carrots is a quarterback. Premise two, John eats carrots. Therefore, John is a quarterback. That's obviously false, but it's logically valid. It's just that the premises, or at least premise one, is false. So that's a good example of a deductive argument. Since I mentioned the other ones, inductive arguments are probability-based, which are much more broadly applicable because a lot of reality we can't have certainty regarding. So it's a very important realm of discussion to be able to calculate probabilities. And there's a lot we could go into that. It's more complicated, but there's Boolean logic and all that kind of great stuff. And then there's abductive reasoning, which is by inference. So we'll have to get into those more. But so far, I've been talking about heuristics that are just more simple principles of critical thinking that have excellent applicability. So, like the one I was talking about in my debate with the balloon earther was the expert consensus. If there's a consensus of experts, a strong consensus of experts on one side of an issue, and you aren't an expert, the only reasonable option is to accept that, because you're going to be much more probably correct if you accept the expert consensus. You have the option to either accept it or become an expert yourself, because you're not going to find the flaws in the expert's reasoning if you don't understand the whole picture. You have to know what they know in order to counter the consensus.
Consensus being key. Like, just because somebody claims that they're an 100%. Expert in whatever, yes, doesn't mean that you should accept their position, because that's just an appeal to authority.
Right. And there's obviously there's two prongs that you run into problems with. on the one hand, an individual expert's never evidence for anything, because if you're the lone wolf in a field that's going against the expert consensus, that helps you sell a lot of books. So, of course, there's a vested interest in bucking consensus. That doesn't make you more likely correct. So, one expert or a couple experts is never evidence. And the other thing is the people claim it's an argument ad populum. But no, we're not surveying random people's opinion. These are experts who have studied the field for years. And that's fundamentally different. So what we're not saying that they're right because a bunch of people have the same opinion. We're saying they're right because they've studied it and they've built a consensus based on the actual academic evidence using academic methodology. So that's why it's different, and you really can't argue against it because we all rely on expert consensus in most areas of our life. We just reject it when it contradicts our biases.
Not only is it about like consensus, because people would claim that, well, that's just an appeal to popularity or appeal to masses, same thing. But it's deeper than that. When we say that there's a consensus, what's really being said that's hidden in there is that it's a better or preferred methodology. That methodology has stood the test of time. These people have challenged it, and that's why there's a consensus.
Yep. Yeah, most people who reject science don't know what science is. And they always say, well, I have science on my side too. And then they point at somebody in a lab coat that's saying the Earth is 6,000 years old and think that's science. But obviously science isn't an opinion, it's a methodology. And the entire point of scientific method is to eliminate our reliance on human opinion and subjectivity as much as possible. And that's why it's really absurd to argue that scientists are biased when the entire point of science is to eliminate that. So if they're not applying scientific method well, you can make that argument. You can make that argument when it comes to pharmaceuticals, because pharmaceutical companies fund all this research and they can fund 10 studies, but they're only going to publish the one that favors their position. That's not good use of scientific methodology, and you can make that criticism. But if you can't just say it's scientists' opinions and disregard it when they're using accurate scientific methodology. Vincere, of course, why wouldn't it? Denmark's, according to Forbes, which is not a socialist source, according to Forbes, definitely. Denmark is the most friendly country for business. And it's a democratic socialist country. So it was asked, so do you think innovation will thrive in a truly socialist society? Yep.
And my response is, hell yes, it will. If you have more people, there's research that shows about in America about $75,000 per year means that you're pretty comfortable. You can pay your bills, you have less stress, you got food on the table. Your happiness, that's maximized happiness, is $75,000 a year. After that, if you make more than that, happiness just flatlines. So if more people are making that kind of income, are less stressed, are able to support themselves and their family, then you'll have more innovation. You'll have more people with more spending money that they can play around with, which would lead to more innovation.
Right. I mean, if we didn't have billionaires, think about how many more millionaires we could have. Like, who needs $1 billion? The big problem for me with billionaires isn't that they have a whole lot of money. It's that they have a whole lot of power. Nobody can spend that kind of money. It's not improving their standard of living. To Ross's point, it's not increasing their happiness. It's just giving them power. They have more power than many kings do and have. Jeff Bezos' wealth is greater than the gross domestic product of Ukraine. And Ukraine has like 60 million people. That's insane. That is power. And what did he do to earn that?
I'd like to challenge Dorian's comment. So he responded to the innovation question with, necessity, not profit, is the mother of invention. I don't think necessity is either, because there's a lot of inventions that happen that are not based on necessity at all. It's more of like laziness almost is more the mother of invention. Like
Yeah.
um
It's a good saying and it has some truth to it,
saying
but
and it has some
it's not the whole
right.
picture for sure. There's a lot to innovation. Like education's a huge part of it. If we would have certainly have a
Definitely.
lot more innovation in a socialist country that had universal higher education, that's easy to see why that would be. Uh, Obviously we want to reward innovators, so innovators would have a better standard of living. They just wouldn't be billionaires. And to be clear, most innovators aren't currently wealthy because they work for corporations, and part of their contract says they don't own the innovations they create on company time. So you have all kinds of people who have produced tremendous innovations that make all of our lives better, and they're working for 50 grand a year at some corporation. So
Man,
that's not a fair situation.
picking this corn in the heat is sure a pain in the butt. My bucket that I carry with me doesn't hold very much. I gotta go in and out of the field. Sure would be nice if I had some machines that could pick this corn for me instead of doing it by hand. That's kind of laziness.
Yeah,
So
there's a lot. Yeah,
innovation kind of comes from laziness. Like, man, I want to save myself some time so I can be lazy, so I can relax, so I can have some
yeah.
downtime.
There's innovation caused by laziness. There's innovation caused by necessity. Uh, reading a really good historical book about the World War II, and it was talking about how the soldiers, like their innovation, like they learned how to use all kinds of mortar shells and other explosives as improvised grenades because they were out of grenades. Like they needed something and they were running low, and you got to use what you got. So sometimes necessity is the mother of invention. Sometimes the mother of invention is that you're paid to innovate, and you have a team of people that's researching a solution, and that's just your day job. You show up and you work on trying to engineer a solution. And sometimes that solution is engineered by private companies. A lot of time it's engineered by government research, which would still be happening under a socialist country, only more so, most likely. So most of our major innovations, our infrastructure, our internet, our satellites that we're relying on for this conversation, those things happen because of government research. A lot of drugs, a lot of medical technology is funded by taxpayer dollars. So sometimes the best way to innovate is to have a team of people trying to solve a problem, and then they solve it. Yeah, Dorian, sometimes the actual truth of the thing is difficult to put in a bumper sticker. There are many paths to invention. It just doesn't. Yeah, it's not as valuable. Alrighty. Well, our very short conversation has gone on for 3 hours now.
Well,
It was
we
good
didn't really
conversation.
stick to the topic either.
Well, I've been trying to get conservatives to show up in my chat for a while, so I appreciate you coming, Vincere. And seriously speaking, I would love to talk to you more, because I used to be conservative myself, and I have pretty good reasons why I'm not now, I think. But if you can show me wrong, I would love to test my ideas against you. So let's see the free marketplace of ideas and not be like Cold Feet Crowder. I don't know if you guys all saw that, but there's a Sam Cedar has been trying to debate Steven Crowder at Politicon, and that was supposed to happen, but one of the event organizers called Sam, and he actually recorded the phone call, and the organizer said that he pulled out because he had cold feet. So now there's
People are sending Crowder socks.
Yes.
I don't know if it's like just digitally like gifts or if they're actually sending them socks.
There's a bunch of clips of celebrities from the right and the left that are telling him he should debate. It's awesome.
Crowder, yeah.
Well, and this is the thing. If you're on the
And
side of
something
the
about his
political
daddy,
spectrum
too.
that won't have serious discussions, that should be a red flag for you. Ben Shapiro
Something about-
doesn't debate serious people. Dave Rubin won't debate serious people. Steven Crowder won't debate serious people. Like, people like Ben Shapiro and Steven Crowder, they make a living off of challenging random people where they can, if they're asked a good question, are they going to release the video if they're embarrassed? Of course not. They have all the power. They have the mic. They have the platform. And unless it's leaked by an observer who happens to be filming it, those ones disappear. But random people on the street aren't as prepared as somebody like Sam Cedar or Kyle Kalinske or Cenk Unger. Like, these people, I'm glad to put in debate against anybody if it's a fair debate. Although I will say, if you're going to debate anybody, the debates are won or lost before they even start, based on the agreed to structure and what the debate topic is. So I would encourage people to keep the debate topic as limited as possible.
So, to play devil's advocate, to be fair, let's not strawman, let's not misrepresent. To be fair, it's not Crowder's fault.
Oh yes,
it's his daddy that won't let him.
Daddy said not to debate.
Daddy won't let him debate.
Yeah, don't
He
be like
doesn't have
Cold Feet
permission.
Crowder. And then there's the Ben Shapiro with the conservative from UK asking a couple difficult questions, and he gets all bent out of shape. And to be fair, Ben Shapiro, I think who did he debate? He debated somebody, I think, in Politicon. But generally, he does try to avoid these debates because they don't go well for him. A lot of his points are horrible. So,
I live my life like a capitalist every day, Jank.
yes, discourse is important, Vincere. Like, honestly, like, that's what I attribute most of my education to, because my homeschooled education was pretty limited in its effectiveness, but most of it was actually learning from discussing with other people and studying critical thinking and reading the knowledge that's out there. Like, humanity has so much knowledge right now. It's really sad that people throw so much of it away. And there's so many red flags, if you're thinking about it critically, about the entire right wing right now, that you should be thinking about these things. Think about the fact that they're on the wrong side of climate change. If you don't believe climate change is happening, like, that's a separate conversation we can have. But even most of the figures on the right are now admitting that it's happening and humans have caused it. They're saying that it's too late to do anything about it, or it's too expensive, or what have you. But think about all the decades where everybody on the right was denying it, in spite of all the scientific consensus saying it was happening. That's because they had flawed epistemology, and that's a sign of concern about the entire right, because they believe it. And once you reject the scientific consensus on climate change, it's really easy to also reject the scientific consensus on the age of the Earth and evolution, and then you're jumping into deep state conspiracies and all this other kind of crazy crap.
So, Vincere, I think the red flag that Steve was talking about, an even bigger red flag for me, is if somebody won't debate. Like, Steve and I are here. This is more of a discussion than a debate about gun control, but I'm not here to win, and I know Steve's not either. We're here because we actually value what that quote of Matt Dillahunty's. We actually value truth. We actually care about what's true and what's not. We do want to accept as many true things as possible, while at the same time rejecting as many false things as possible. Both of those are key. Both of those are necessary. If somebody's not willing to have even a discussion, if you want to call it discussion instead of a debate, they're not seeking truth. They're not willing to say, you know what you're saying makes a lot of sense. Maybe I'm wrong on this. And that should be a red flag. Yeah. Like, why can't you just be humble and have a discussion, have a debate, And if you're wrong or you made a mistake, then admit it and move on. Like, it's humbling.
Yeah.
More people should do that.
What was his name? The balloon earther I was debating, to his credit, he wanted to have a formal debate with, like, where we have opening statements and the exact same amount of time for everybody. And I made, like I said, debates are won or lost before they start. And so I was arguing to him in private messages that if you value truth, that's not a method you get to truth at, because, you know, you can stand up and say 20 false things and I won't have time to rebut them all. But I could do the same thing about you. I could just stand up in my 5 minutes and make up 50 lies about the blog he had, and you wouldn't have time to rebut that all. That's going to go nowhere. And this is how a lot of debates work. So I do think the discussion model is a more honest model if we're approaching it with charity to each other's positions. You know, one of the rules of a logical discussion is you have to be able to interrupt each other, I think. Because if somebody says something that you disagree with, you have to be able to interject and make clear that that's disagreed on before they ramble on to 20 other points. Or build an entire case on that one flawed premise. Because what's the point in us all wasting our time listening to you build a giant long case on a flawed premise? Let's hash that out first.
Vincier says, I'm troubled that all climate models to date have been proven to be flawed. I'm quite skeptical of that, but you don't need models
Ross,
for climate change.
This is not something we're skeptical of. I challenge you to show me a scientific prediction of the climate from the last 40 years that was accepted by a mainstream scientific body that has been shown incorrect. One. That's a challenge. It doesn't exist. People say scientific models have been incorrect, but they point at headlines and journalists and idiots like Al Gore. They're not talking about accepted mainstream scientific predictions, because those have been accurate for 40 years. Exxon had predictions. They had such an accurate climate model in the 70s. They predicted our specific temperature and CO2 in the 70s. And yet they funded climate denial instead. And this is all on the record.
All right, you guys. I'm off of here. I had fun, though.
Yeah, it was fun. Thanks for coming, Ross. Anything else you want to say?
No
or you want to promote it at Twitter or anything else you got?
I'm not on Twitter. I'm not on very much social media at all. If people want to get in touch with me on Discord, then I guess they're welcome to. I'm on Facebook as Ross Fraley. I'm probably the only Ross Fraley. If I'm not, then I'm the one with a photo of the image is called Son of Man. It's from the Thomas Crown movie and stuff. It's pretty popular, but it's the guy with he's in a business suit, bowler hat with a Granny Smith apple in front of his face.
Ah, yes. And you're Simi in my Discord, so if you're in my Discord, you'll see him in there.
I'm Simi3007 on Steam. That's usually what I go by Simi. I'll probably drop the numbers for games. What else? I mean, that's it. Mostly I'm on Facebook all the time, and that's where I would prefer if somebody wants to chat and get in touch with me. Ross Fraley on Facebook.
Cool. Well, thanks for coming, Ross. We had a good conversation, and we'll have to pick it up again sometime. Have a good night.
Yeah, no problem. I'll be sharing more of your Facebook posts.
Right on. I'll be sharing
later,
yours.
Dorian. Vincier, Jared, and I don't know who else was in this. I thought there was a female.
Yeah, they're Marquise.
Right. Marquise. Yes. All right. Later, you guys.
Later.
I agree with Dorian. Not being on Twitter is smart.
Yeah, Twitter.
I don't follow Trump on anything.
Twitter is poison for the brain. It incentivizes bad behavior, basically. It incentivizes poor thinking and reactionary content, and
I like to reduce trolls as much as possible. So if somebody does add me on Facebook, I'll probably private message you and want to find out where we met or where you got my name from and stuff like that. Just check out our mutual friends if we have any. I try not to just add anybody and everybody.
Yep.
All right, I'm off here, guys.
All
Night.
right. Have a good night. Vincera, highly recommend Potholer 54's playlist on climate change. He was doxxed a while ago, so everybody knows he's actually a professional science journalist, and he's from the days before the internet, before clickbait headlines. He's a science journalist with ethics and integrity, and he knows how to report science, and he knows how this philosophy of science, and he links the citations, and he explains how climate change works, and he debunks the myths. So in this case, he's debunking Al Gore. So he does go on against alarmists as well as deniers, but the clear consensus of climate change is not good for the future. It's looking pretty bad. And this is all of the evidence. There's tremendous amounts of it. So I've listened to his entire playlist a couple times. Just the first couple videos explain climate change very simply and get you on board with understanding the models and how it works. But yeah, all of them are good. They explain all the talking points that people have put forth against it, all this kind of stuff. Highly recommend it. But yeah, that the question, if you have a citation, is kind of a reversal of the burden of proof, because I can't show you every single mainstream prediction of science for the last 40 years, because that would be a tremendously huge word doc, and I have a life. But anybody who tells you that the scientific model fails or that the scientific predictions have failed, ask them to support their claim. Ask them for a citation. And what you'll find, I guarantee it because I've done this many times, they'll link you headlines. Well, journalists are often not honest. They often misrepresent science. A lot of these videos Potholer 54 talks about are rebutting these claims of journalists, because some journalists in the 70s, 80s, 90s, they made a wrong claim. Or they're a politician. Like AOC, I like AOC, but she said that the Earth is going to end in 12 years if we don't do something. She was misquoting the science. Now, I don't blame her because there's a slip of the tongue. She's just talking quick, whatever. But the actual research says that if we don't have dramatic change within the next 12 years, the cost to the planet and the humanity will be significant in 50 years. No one's saying the Earth is ending in 12 years, but it's a snowball going downhill. And if we don't slow it down or stop it in the next 12 years, the penalties 50 years down the road are substantially higher. So that was an example of misquoting the evidence. Famous ones people point to are headlines from the Times and other places from the 70s saying that an ice age was coming. Well, these articles were misquoting the science, because in most cases the science scientific research they were quoting was saying that an ice age was coming in 20,000 years or something like that, like way off in the future. It wasn't imminent. In fact, if you pull the peer-reviewed science from the 70s, 70% of it agreed that the Earth was about facing a warming trend because of human activity. Way back in the 70s. That was still a consensus. It wasn't a clear consensus because there was still disagreement. Some people thought that the pollution would offset global warming, and the particulates would shield us from the sun, and it would affect that and could cause cooling. That's been shown to be false. But there was controversy at the time, but there wasn't a mainstream scientific prediction. When I say that, it'd be like a scientific body, like the National Academy of Science, like NASA, like an actual scientific body making a prediction, not just some random idiot, like some random scientist. It would be a body, a consensus that's predicting something. Those predictions have been quite accurate. I'm not saying that they have no flaws, because one of your comments said they've been proven to have flaws. Well, of course, everything has flaws. But overall, they've been spectacularly accurate. Well, you'd have to show how that they're not accurate. And that's a whole other conversation. We're not getting into it 10 o'clock. So, yeah, all the research I've seen, all the predictions that happened in the past have been accurate. And climate's incredibly complicated. But it's very clear what's happening. It's very clear what's... Hey, River. I'm about to sign off. It's been a long stream. We've been going for almost 3.5 hours. Let me just do this real quick. Just because I don't want to leave it on this note. Because climate change is an incredibly important topic. And I highly recommend that Potholer 54. But in the meantime, just... Do I have... Oh, yes. Climate facts. These are incontroversial facts. And this is what you need to keep in mind. Because you understand, pointing to some flaws in the model would not be enough to plant doubt about anthropomorphic climate change. Because the fundamentals of how we know this are much too strong for that. So, climate facts. CO2 in the atmosphere traps heat and raises temperature. That's demonstrated in lab experiments. It's non-controversial. Humanity's put out a significant amount of carbon. Non-controversial. It's went up dramatically since the industrial age. Non-controversial. Average global temperatures have risen with CO2 far faster than climate change is on its own. This is a beautiful little graphic that demonstrates how the other causes of climate change are not enough to account for the recent rise in temperatures. So this is Bloomberg. In fact, I imagine I can put the link into chat. So anyway, it's a good little visualization because a lot of climate deniers will say that these other drivers of climate are causing the rise. But no, the only thing that accounts for it is CO2. Ice melts when temperature rises. Water expands when temperature rises. So that means the sea level is going to rise, which is going to cost a tremendous amount of money because all of our cities are on the coast. Positive feedback mechanisms exist that accelerate climate change. So permafrost is melting, releasing methane, which is another atmospheric gas that traps heat. The bare earth absorbs heat. Carbon's sequestered in the ocean, but it sequesters less when the ocean's hotter. So these things cause climate change to happen faster. That's why the current models are predicting 3 to 5 degrees Celsius by 2100. That's about 7 degrees Fahrenheit hotter on average for the entire planet. So, I mean, think about the difference between 75 degrees, comfortable, and 82 degrees. Now, that's like starting to be warm. It's a little easier to generate a sweat. Think about the difference between 115 degrees and 122. Think about the fact that your heat spikes, this is an average temperature. Some places actually get colder as part of the model. So to compensate for that, other places are getting even hotter. So you'll have isolated regions and heat spikes that are 10, 15 degrees hotter. And at those temperatures, mammals can't survive outside without air conditioning. So you're going to have barren areas as life leaves because they can't survive. You're going to have massive migration. And because of that, it's probably going to have unrest, if not World War III. Like, there's a lot of stuff goes on with the climate change models, and it's important. So it's important to educate yourself on those. But anyway, I just wanted to do a quick run through on it since we brought that up. I feel like we've discussed almost every political topic there is in the stream. So we're good. So anyway, thank you so much for being here, guys. I appreciate it. Let's call this a day. Have a great night. And join my Discord. And I thought I'd have my website ready. Actually, let me show you that real quick. So this is my website. Yay. This is where my stream is supposed to be. As you can see, it's not here right now. So I'm still working on it. And that's going to disappear. You can guess where the structure of the website's coming from. But White Noveros is helping me with it. And hopefully next time I'll be asking everybody to go to the website, which is re-vera.life. And when you comment here, it's going to pop up on the screen. So it's going to be nice. And all the donations and subs and stuff is going to just pop up as events. So it's very cool. So that's hopefully coming soon, within the next week or so. She's very busy, and so am I. So nothing happens super quick. But anyway, thanks so much for coming and the good conversation. And if you want to discuss anything with me, like I did with Ross, let me know. I'm glad to. It's always more entertaining to have somebody to talk to than just sit here and rant for a while. So I appreciate that. If there's anything you disagree with me on, especially, because if we just sit here and agree with each other on everything, it can get a little boring. So whatever you disagree with me on, I'd like to apply some critical thinking and the heuristics of critical thought to that and see where we get. So let me know if that's of interest. I've linked my Discord a couple times, so you can direct message me on there. Thanks. Have a good night.